Live from the studio.
studio.
We are in the money, baby. How's it sounding?
Sound good. We don't normally
Sounds
do
great.
that.
We're sounding great.
Sounds great.
We're sounding great. I'm Jimmy Selesky.
Merrick Glazer. Tonight on the cast, we have...
Jabari Lyles.
Woo!
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit, because we covered this before the show. How did you... Well, we didn't cover this before the show, actually, at all. But I knew you from high school. You were like the president of the class, 08, right?
I was student government president,
Which is
like for the whole school.
Oh shit, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a difference. I didn't understand government in high school at
Each
all.
class had their own like thing, and then there was a whole school.
You were the president of the presidents?
I was the president of the presidents.
Whoa.
That's sick. But you were involved with the GSA at school, right?
I did. I helped start that GSA.
Oh, really?
Yep.
How did you do that?
Basically, we got it, together with some students and asked the administration, like, hey, we want to have this club. It was me and Alex Ginger.
I remember him, yes.
And we filled out the paperwork, and we got an advisor. And
Who was the
rest is
advisor back
history.
then?
I want to say at that time maybe Miss West.
Oh, Miss West was
Miss
awesome. Dude. I
West.
loved Miss West.
Yeah,
I
and
loved
then,
Miss West.
eventually Mr. Dulcimer took it over.
Dude, I
as
played
the-
his wedding recently.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, dude. I had no clue.
He's still the advisor to this
Is
day.
he really?
The
That's
club
sick.
is still up and
That
running.
is sick.
Awesome.
Some of the kids come to some of our events, so it's cool to like have them come.
Yeah. I like how you say some of our events like it's a small little thing.
We have a couple of events, and, some kids show.
Well, it's
up.
a bigger. I mean, like, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how did you? Because you came along the line, and now, so you graduated high school. Did you go to college at all?
I went to Duquesne University for a year in Pittsburgh, and then I got kicked out of there.
What did you get kicked out for?
I didn't do any of my work.
do it.
I didn't go to class. I didn't wake up for 8 a.m. Latin.
Who does?
Seriously, right?
Real.
Latin?
I went to all my math classes. I was a math major, and so I went to all my math classes because I enjoyed that.
I personally think it's bullshit that they make you take gen eds in college.
Yeah,
I think that's
it's dumb.
stupid. I think that's ridiculous.
But I mean, you want to have like a diverse education.
Isn't that what high school's for? You go to high school, you get your education, you go to college, you say, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Some high school graduates might benefit from an extra English 101 course.
Or Latin 101, who knows?
Or Latin.
Yeah. Why were you taking Latin first year of college?
Well, foreign language was required, and I had taken Latin in high school. I took French in middle school, and I thought, it helps you with words and kind of different. I had some experience with it. So I figured, yeah, Latin it is.
Do you know any at the moment? Like, do you speak Latin?
I mean,
you didn't show up in any classes, so I imagine no.
I think some of it is kind of useful sometimes, like the word somnambulist.
What does that mean?
Oh, so it's a sleepwalker. It comes from the Latin somnus, which means sleep, and ambulare, which means to walk. So we get the word somnambulist. Latin, bam, it lives. It lives to this day.
So did you ever wind up graduate? Did you ever get a degree or anything?
So I graduated Duquesne, came home.
Oh, you did graduate.
I mean, sorry. I got kicked out of Duquesne. Kicked out of Duquesne
Big
for a
difference.
year.
Graduated
Big
or
difference.
kicked out.
Transferred.
I did my own special graduation from Duquesne.
Had a ceremony. and
Right.
everything.
Yeah, the whole drive home from Pittsburgh.
Got to meet the dean.
Just
See
packed
ya.
up my Jeep and said, peace, Pittsburgh. I guess that was fun for a year. And then I went to CCBC.
There you go.
I got my associates.
Where all the champs end up.
Yeah, for sure. Seriously.
CCBC, baby.
The best that Towson has to offer.
So you did. So you were going to CCBC, I'm assuming, during the time you were working at Cheesecake Factory?
Yep. Same
And then
stuff.
you said you're teaching at Friends?
I currently teach at Friends School during the summer for it's like a summer learning program called Middle Grade Partnership.
Do you need a degree for that? Did you get a degree in teaching?
I did not. I to this day do not have a degree. Yeah.
Damn.
I'm just some dude with a high school
Us too.
diploma. Just walking
us
around teaching children. Yeah.
How did you come across the place you're with now, GLSEN, which it took me a while to figure out how to pronounce that.
Well, you
I was
did
like,
that perfectly.
GLSEN, yeah.
GLSEN.
I had to watch a couple of YouTube videos to really nail it down.
Perfect.
But
Well, you did some research for this
I
appearance.
try.
That's amazing. Well, I was like 15, and there was an announcement at the good old Towson High School for students to get involved with LGBT stuff. And I said, yeah, sure. So I showed up to the meeting. I met this woman named Kay Halley. She was like an older, civil rights activist, lesbian, just an amazing spirit. And, I just never stopped coming to the meetings, I guess. I just kept going. And she started booking me at schools, doing presentations for young people and training. And I just loved it. And so the rest was history. That was 12 years ago.
wow, I didn't realize that you were doing that the entire time that you were.
I was
like,
in Towson. Yep.
And what is your position now there? You're like what are you
I'm
there?
director of the Baltimore chapter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Hopefully we become a GLSEN Maryland next year.
Okay.
So we're called GLSEN Baltimore because we're based in Baltimore and we do a lot of work in Baltimore. But really we do work all over the state. So we're going to expand to GLSEN Maryland to offer our services to all the schools.
What kind of work would you say is done?
So, the main mission is making sure that school is a safe place for students who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, all those wonderful words. And so we, do a whole bunch of strategies and projects and resources to make sure that that happens. So we train teachers, we give them professional development. We come in and say, this is how you should communicate with LGBT students. These are the things that you should say. These are the things you shouldn't say. These are what the words mean. These are the risk factors. And teachers really appreciate that, because we don't really get to talk about LGBT issues very often.
That's true.
So we do that. We help to start GSAs at different schools. So it was cool that I started the GSA at Towson, and then my job becomes starting those clubs at schools all over the state. So we help young people, mobilize to make change within their schools and their communities. And we just do, we're just advocates for young LGBT youth in schools and making sure that schools are safe places for them.
Awesome.
That's sick, dude.
Yeah, I love it. It's a perfect job.
And we're talking a little bit before the podcast. You kind of guerrilla warfared. Was that the organization, or is there another organization?
I love the guerrilla warfare.
Hell yeah.
So that was a different organization. That was GLCCB, Baltimore's LGBT Community Center. So I started with them like maybe 2 years ago. And I joined their board and recognized they had a lot of issues. So I kind of just took over the organization, became the president, became the executive director, fired people that needed to be fired, rehired people that needed to be rehired. And now, Baltimore can say it has a community center again. So I wear a couple of like gay hats.
Well,
all
that's
over Maryland.
now Baltimore's taken care of, so you can expand to Maryland.
Yeah.
Well, you were involved. Were you involved? I was talking to, Phil Williams, right?
Of course, yeah.
Phil's my boy. I love him.
Shout out to Phil.
Yeah, shout out Phil Williams, dude. Shout out to that man. What a great guy. But were you had some type of what kind of involvement do you have with the Pride Parade this year?
Yeah, so Baltimore Pride is put on by the GLCCB, the community
Really?
center. So I'm president of the organization that makes Baltimore Pride happen every year.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So this past year, we had an incredible team of volunteers that put it together. Last year, Baltimore Pride 2016, I was the chair of the whole event. So I had to plan the thing, and that takes a lot of stuff.
What was your position this year?
Well, this year I was just president of the organization. So I got to walk
sweet.
around and enjoy it and have,
You got the wine and dine.
yeah, shake hands and kiss babies.
Mango.
Yeah, so I got to really just walk around.
And you said it was the 31st,
42nd.
42nd.
Yes,
So
42nd
bad.
Baltimore Pride.
It's been going on for 42
42
years.
42
years,
years.
yeah. The
I had-
GLCCB is a 40-year-old organization.
Well, because I know that GLSEN was started in what 90,
Yep,
1990,
1990. Yep.
and so okay. I'm just starting to piece things together. I tried to do all the research I could, but I'm still a little behind on everything.
It's perfect.
So I had no clue that the Pride Parade was that ongoing. I had no
Definitely.
clue. I thought that was a recent thing.
Yeah, Baltimore's community center is one of the longest running in the country. So we're right up there with, San Francisco, LA, New York. Baltimore was one of the first people who got in the game to make a community center. So it's been around for a really long time.
What would you say? Because when I was looking around, what would you say that the I guess I don't know what to call it. I want to say group, but I feel like that's undermining what it is. What would I guess organization GLSEN, like the organization.
Yeah.
What would you say their main? Because it seems like they're involved with a lot of like legislation.
I think these days, yeah, definitely. GLSEN has positioned itself to be an organization that is a thought leader in education policy around diversity and climate issues. Whereas, maybe
Climate issues.
school climate.
Okay, school climate.
Yeah.
It's like, okay,
Right,
that's a
yeah.
stretch.
That's
okay.
different, right?
Hey, you know, fuck it.
I mean, we try to play our
Needs
part.
to be talked about.
Right, for sure. Right? So yeah, like 10 or 15 years ago, that was not a thing, where the U.S. Department of Education would talk to GLSEN. But these days, they have a good relationship.
Very prevalent. I was looking around and like you guys. So when I was looking through the website, you guys have what the hell did I put down here? I was writing some notes. The
Nice.
Safe Schools Improvement Act, which was passed, or was that passed federally? Or
Yeah, definitely. GLSEN had a lot of involvement in that Safe Schools Improvement Act. It was a really big victory.
what was that? What did that entail?
Well, I mean, whatever it sounds like, Safe Schools Improvement Act. I think a lot of it was about protections for students who typically are maybe marginalized in schools. I don't know the text of the actual legislation, but a lot of the work that GLSEN does for its advocacy is about protection, protection of students of different races, different genders, different sexual orientations. And so we defer to a lot of the language that already exists to talk about protection, like Title IX.
Yeah.
Like that's sex discrimination, but a lot of that has been interpreted to include LGBT people too. So yeah, I mean, we just want the government to take a stance on making sure that young people are safe. And so I'm sure that act, the Safe School Improvement Act, was all about that.
I'm assuming you might. I would assume so. But like one of the things that really surprised me was they had these what they call no promo homo laws in certain they're more prevalent in southern states,
Right.
which I was like really blew me away. But basically, like they have these laws saying that you're not allowed to promote like homosexual lifestyle during
Definitely.
sexual education.
Yep.
Which is crazy to me.
Huge.
They had actual laws that said like you cannot basically you cannot talk about this in a positive light.
Right.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
That shit was
that is
crazy.
the law of the land, that you may not say positive things about this. And so, I mean, think about the harm that does to a young person who wants to know how to protect themselves sexually. In a district where they're only talking about, either no sex, abstinence, or, heterosexual, good old classic missionary sex, where we know that people get a lot more, wild than that. And so, yeah, when I go around to schools, that might be today one of the number one complaints for students is that they feel underserved by their sexual education in school. Not comprehensive enough.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of school nowadays, at least, I don't know. I felt that way in high school, at least. Everyone's still kind of kids, kind of steps on eggshells around stuff, and
Right.
Real world issues like will come up, and then like I kind of saw that like when 9/11 happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was in elementary school still, but like just the way it kind of like I don't know. Kids got super extra special treatment that day.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, I see everything that's going on. Like, this is kind of crazy.
Right.
Why are you kind of downplaying this for me? This is kind of a weird thing.
Right. We got to be more real with our youth. And in this context, I mean, young people know themselves, right? They know their identity. They know what they feel. They know what they see. And we just have to listen to them more. Because you're right. There's realism in the world that young people need to be able to handle.
Yeah.
And so we make them sort of skittish people around sex by treating it like that in school. And that doesn't set them up for approaching sex in a mature, confident, healthy way.
I agree. I always just wonder, look, I grew up, obviously, I'm a heterosexual guy. And
Obviously.
In case you couldn't tell,
Right.
totally straight.
It's so obvious.
Super clear.
Noted.
But I always imagine what it might be like to kind of come up in an educational system that doesn't acknowledge, here's the conflict, I guess. when I grew up, and I guess it's because I came up in a more traditional sense manner where being heterosexual is quote unquote norm, and so I guess I kind of received some of my education from school, but the majority of education I received about sex and things like that was from my upbringing. You know, like it wasn't
parents and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It
Right.
wasn't. I didn't depend too much on the educational system to do that. But I imagine if you're coming up from a place where maybe your parents don't agree with that kind of lifestyle, or
Right.
let's say you're gay, but your parents don't agree with that kind of thing. Like, where do you go to kind of even feel like that's okay to be that way? You know what I'm saying?
Right. You got to find a community. I think that the LGBT community has really relied on that sense of community to get by and survive for a really long time. So whether we create those communities in schools with those GSAs or creating them at community centers, where students can go outside of school and have a place in their city to go to, they have to know that there is a place for them to count on. And honestly, these days, the internet kind of plays a huge role in that.
Absolutely.
Like the kids today they have access to a network that young gay, lesbian, trans folks 20, 30 years ago didn't have.
Oh, that's
Oh,
true.
sure.
I wasn't even thinking about that.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, even just like if you singled it down to like a single site like YouTube, like there's so many different like personalities on that website that you
Definitely.
could watch and listen to and talk, like hear them talk about with other, dignitaries in that culture.
Yeah, and idolize. I mean, another part of GLSEN's work is making sure that the education that young people receive is inclusive, right? So that we learn positive representations of LGBT people. Sally Ride, first woman in space, lesbian.
Really?
Yeah.
Did not know
Alan Turing, father of computer science, gay man.
Yeah.
So these are like huge advancements that are made by LGBT people, but intentionally left out of history books. And when you think about those no promo homo laws, this plays right into that. So it's not even just health class, it's like your history class. So when young people can regularly learn about the accomplishments and contributions of LGBT people, maybe they'll think about it a little bit different, know that we exist and we are actually really cool.
That's true. I guess a lot of the I don't know what the word would be, resistance against that is people are sending their kids to schools and they, I guess based off of their own belief systems, they're thinking that, well, I'm paying taxes and if I'm sending my kid to this school, I want him to learn about what I want him to learn about, which is conflicting because then you're dealing with people's kind of, I don't want to say religious because it's not always religious, right, but it is a certain form of ideology that isn't based in what I would necessarily call logic.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the approach for it is it's logical to expect young people to learn to accept and respect all people. And school is a perfect place where young people learn, values, character education in such a way where they meet people of diverse backgrounds and be able to at least respect them. And so, I always say during trainings, my goal is never to change anyone's religious beliefs. I mean, that is your religious beliefs, that's fine. But what I do want to do is help you create a space where people feel safe and accepted. And I think that that's like not too much to ask.
Oh, absolutely.
So, for parents because we do have parents who say stuff like that, like my kid shouldn't be learning this in school. This isn't a part of good old, reading, writing, arithmetic. But we encourage them to understand that this is really just about making sure that people feel safe and have an equal access to a good education.
What are your thoughts on, in terms of public school, absolutely, because I feel
Right.
but for instance, you teach at Friends, correct? Which is a
Over
private
the summer,
school.
yep.
Which is a private school.
Yep.
And if the parents that send their kids to Friends, that's the one.
Yeah, I just got the same
That happens
thing.
to-
Sorry.
I've seen that happen to all of us.
Yeah. It's High Life's always coming at you.
Right.
All right,
It's the
perfect.
champagne of beer.
Yes, it is. Just
Champagne
pop
and
bottles in here. All right. I'm cooled off.
Yeah.
There always seems to be, and it's kind of hypocritical because the same people who raise the moral arguments of, well, you shouldn't be able to go into my school and teach my kids things that I don't morally agree with seems to be raised on the side of like, well, you know, if I send my kid to public school, then and if I disagree with these things, then I shouldn't have to worry about my kid learning about things that I don't necessarily agree with. But at the same time, it's like, this is a public institution.
Yeah.
We're going to teach your kids about objective facts.
Right.
You know, we're going to teach your kids about things that actually exist. You can, and I think that's the thing that a lot of people lose about the home life is, I don't know about you. Again, I'll re-say that I think most of the values that I learned were from my upbringing, or my family life. I relied very little on, so like a private institution like Friends, where I would assume that, I mean, what subject do you teach at Friends? Math, okay. So very devoid of anything like that.
I mean, the content itself, yes, but I think that my approach to teaching is always like, social justice is threaded throughout, you know, everything that I teach about. So I always say that I teach like 5/6 math and like 1/6 just like social justice. So we talk about these issues in math class regularly. We talk about, you know, race and gender and class and society. And I think that, you know, there are opportunities in math where you can include that, you know, graphs.
For
And
sure.
also, if you're just like a good teacher, you'll develop a relationship with the students and be able to talk to them about that individually too.
Definitely. And I mean, I'm really lucky to be able to work at a school, you know, when I'm not teaching at Friends. I just finished teaching at Hampstead Hill Academy in Baltimore City. And feeling really lucky to be just like out as a gay teacher. Is something that I know teachers years ago
Did you
would never have.
go to the it was at the Hippodrome a few weeks ago. It was like the teacher awards. I forget what the exact name. This is terrible.
That sounds cool.
It was a great ceremony. I was there shooting like video for the actual event.
Right.
But it was cool. Every year they honor like 5 Baltimore City principals that are kind of like
cool.
pushing forward and like really doing something for their school. And it was a cool event.
Right.
You should try to
Yeah.
head
I
out
want to
there
be
one
invited
time.
to the teacher awards.
Yeah, dude, I
Jeez.
feel like you might got a shot.
Yeah,
Have you
hopefully.
received now Friends being a private institution? They're like they're Quaker, right?
Quaker, yep.
Friends is I don't even know it. The only thing I think about with Quaker is like the oatmeal box. I don't fucking know.
I think a lot of us.
Yeah, Quakers.
Ben Franklin,
you know,
wasn't
yeah.
Ben Franklin a Quaker? Or does he just look like the
He looks like a
box
Quaker.
guy?
He looks. If he wasn't a Quaker, he should have considered it. But do you get any backlash? Like, are there? I guess what my question is: do you receive when you intertwine that kind of social justice material into your curriculum? Do you receive any backlash from parents opposing that?
At Friends, no. I think Friends, the community is very progressive. The religion of being a Quaker is not a religion that is, against homosexuality. It's actually a really nice religion. It's basically just do good, live simply, and to be a good person. And that's all Quakerism is about. So because of that, it's not like religiously affiliated. And so a lot of their values are all about respecting people and creating space. So Friends is an environment where like that's not a thing. In fact, I taught LGBT 101 this week with my students, with like 4 6th graders.
They actually have a class for that.
Well, during the summer program, I teach math, but we can also teach an elective. And so every year I choose to teach a different elective just on like some cool subject that like I know about, but maybe would want to teach one time. Like last year I did chemistry. First year I did computer science. So this year I'm doing like LGBT, gender studies, media studies stuff. And I had, 6th graders talking about LGBT history, terminology. We did a timeline, we watched some videos. And it was wild to think that like, wow, like here we are. And maybe there are some parents who are against it, but Friends is an environment where, those types of things are welcome.
Are like 6th graders super like smart now? I feel like when I was a 6th grader, I was like a complete idiot. But like every kid growing up now has had like a laptop
It's the
or like an
technology.
iPad or
That's
something,
really what
and
it
just
is.
been ingesting like language and like whatever through video.
Yep.
So I feel like they must be just whiz kids. now.
The vocabulary, like the cadence in which you talk to them is definitely very interesting. And me, I'm a middle school teacher. I love middle school. A lot of teachers hate that age.
I
But-
hated that age.
Yeah, a lot of adults hate that age. You think about it, it was a really awkward time. But 6th through 8th graders, they are a special type of young human, and when you get on their level and you vibe with how they communicate, it makes you feel kind of hip, I suppose. I sound like an old person using that word.
Is that a K through 12 school, Friends?
Friends is all the way.
through 12?
Yep, K
Okay.
through 12, and Hempstead Hill is pre-K through 8.
Okay. So have you taught like the lower, like the 1 through 5?
I have.
Okay.
A couple years ago, I was a resource teacher. I taught health. The class was called Essential Life Skills, but it was really just like a health class.
Yeah.
And I taught pre-K through 8th grade, so I got experience with every single grade, and that was super rewarding. And then I used to teach Jewish preschool.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you Jewish yourself?
I'm from Pikesville, so
Close enough. Close
I'm
enough.
Jewish by association, is what I say. Yeah, Jewish by association. It's a big part of my upbringing, and I love the Jewish culture, and teaching in that school was cool. So I've really been able to like teach so many different grades,
Yeah, that's
and it's really nice.
that's crazy. That's like you've lived like such a crazy life in such like a short amount of time.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
like
it's
very
great. It is
jealous of
insane.
that.
I appreciate that. I've had a lot of really cool experiences, and I think
Yeah.
I've just like fully immersed myself in like whatever I can get involved with, and all the work that I do, I love. Like when I'm in the classroom, I love it. When I'm doing LGBT work, I love it. So that's a blessing also, to be able to like do shit that you love. That's
Yeah.
great.
That's what everyone tells you.
Right.
Do
That's what they
something you
say.
love and
Yeah,
get
they were
paid for
right,
it.
I guess.
It's cool. Everyone else is drinking beer, so I'll keep the silence.
Yeah, we just took a
from
little
getting
sip.
it.
I'm gonna light up another fog right now, dude. Care for a fug?
I'd love one. Absolutely. These are Newports, y'all. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'll never turn down a Newport. Come on.
So I know we talked a little bit about it before the podcast, but I was asking you earlier, like, since you were involved with like carrying the torch of Pride this year, like
That was a bad throw.
without you and your team the last 2 years, like Pride wouldn't have happened, which is crazy
Wouldn't have
in
been
itself.
a thing, yeah.
But I was asking you earlier, like the proudest, like I can't believe that happened moment, and you said
Yeah.
it was a long story, but I think we have the time.
No, for sure. And I really love that you asked that question, because like I remember having that moment. We had Big Frida for Pride this year. And I guess Big Frida is the type of artist, like if you know her, you know her. But if you don't know her, you're like, who the hell is Big Frida?
That's me. I'm
So,
sorry.
Yeah. I see it all over your face, Jimmy. Jimmy's like, ooh.
Show the classic
Yeah.
Baltimore.
Should I
huh?
admit
Like, what
it?
is she?
Should I admit it?
It's admitted. It's all good. I just wanted to, call you in. So, Big Frida, she's like a really visible Black queer icon right now. She was in a Beyonce song, and anything that Beyonce touches is royalty. So, that's one thing. And she has her own show and her own music, and she was a really big pioneer of this stuff called bounce music in New Orleans, which is like this cool like club genre.
Yeah.
And Baltimore Pride and the GLCCB has been an organization that has been, judged for its lack of responsiveness to the community. It was seen as a racist organization, a transphobic organization for a really long time. And this is a 40-year-old organization. And when I joined the board of directors, I knew that, this is something that has to change. We're in Baltimore City.
They were seen as that?
The GLCCB for sure.
Really?
Yeah, definitely.
What does that stand for?
Gay Lesbian Community Center of Baltimore, but the long name is Gay Lesbian Bisexual Transgender Community Center of Baltimore.
Why were they seen as racist?
Well, I think in the beginning it was doing really great work, and around the late 90s, early 2000s, the GLCCB, much like many gay organizations, became led by white people only, and white ideologies and white politics, and did not give space for the real needs and desires of people who were most marginalized, which are, of course, people of color and transgender people and youth.
Yeah. And in such like Baltimore, I'd say is like probably more Black populated than white.
It definitely is. Baltimore's anywhere between like 62 to 68% black.
Yeah.
And so to be in a city where, of course, the people who are most affected by the systems who are LGBT, the people who, need the most attention, to have its community center not focus on them was, obviously a big problem. So when I heard about, joining the board, a lot of people said, don't do it. Like, it's a horrible place. It's racist. It'll never be a thing. And this was 2 years ago. This was in 2015.
Wow.
And so I joined the board, and I was like, guys, like, we're sitting here poo-pooing the GLCCB. No one is building it. No one is fixing it.
No, it's crazy. I bet the time, like, when you joined in to the GLC, like, BB,
Right.
I feel like that's the time when we started hearing about Pride. Like,
Nice.
honestly.
No, that's true.
Because
That's true.
if I'm thinking about it correctly, like, honestly, I didn't know it was a thing until like a couple years ago.
Right.
And it's like, and I feel like it's gotten so big at this, like, I had friends go down. I checked it out a little bit, but like streets were blocked off. Like, it was
Right.
a crazy thing. It was like almost
It's
like an
huge.
artscape.
I mean, it's
type
Maryland's
event.
biggest
It's
LGBT event.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's Maryland's
And, like,
biggest event.
and
for
to like
that.
not even know that's been going on my entire life. That's crazy.
That's a problem. I think that really that's indicative of the GLCCB not being able to do its job, right? Proper outreach to the community, letting people know that we're here to support. And, a lot of their policies and practices were just horrible. I mean, mismanagement of funds, straight up practices where people of color would, not be welcome in the facilities. It was just really, all types of horrible things. You find these things out as, join the board of directors. My whole thing was, let's be honest, right? Let's be honest to the community. Let's say, yes, these things happened, and let's change it. And so me being I was like 25 at the time, a new nonprofit leader, I just kind of took it over and like grabbed the reins and tried to make the GLCCB into like what it needs to be. Like, and that needs to be a place that in Baltimore City, Black people can count on, that transgender people can count on, youth can count on, because there are all types of oppressions that affect, the LGBT community. But we see that white folks that are LGBT, a lot of their other positions of power and privilege make them okay in the grand scheme of housing, employment, healthcare. And these are big issues for the LGBT community. So for my work, I had to change that to a place that we were actually doing that work. And so, that organization was about to crumble. And then I joined, I fired a bunch of folks, hired a bunch of folks. We just, we moved into a new building. There's an incredible staff of like 8 that does great work. And
Where's it located? Just so it's out there.
25th and Charles. So like
Okay.
right in the beginning of like entering Charles Village-ish.
Okay, cool.
It's in a great location, and it's really a beautiful kind of success story that we're
amazing.
seeing in Baltimore. Yeah.
And to kind of lead you back to the question, like you were saying earlier, just being at Pride.
Oh, the
and
proud
seeing-
moment. Yeah, seeing Big Frida on stage and seeing, hundreds of people lined up on Charles Street, seated, everyone shaking their ass, drinking beers, young Black people are dancing and feeling, Baltimore pride, and having an entertainer that felt distinctly like Baltimore, that felt for the community. We moved the whole parade and festival to Station North, which is, more of a community that feels more welcoming to a lot of Black folks than Mount Vernon. So it was just beautiful. And that was the proud moment, is just being there and watching all that and saying, good job, that we made this happen. It was great.
That's awesome. That's just like, that's such a crazy task to kind of undertake, and then just like,
Oh gosh, I can plan anything. I can plan anything now after putting that together. I mean, think about all the pieces: the parade, the vendors, the entertainers, the city, the fire, the police, the music, the food, the alcohol,
all the permits,
all the
that.
permits, the outreach, the communication. I mean, it's a huge project. And so to say that, I've been able to do that is really great.
Yeah.
I can
That's
plan my
amazing.
wedding,
You've built up such. You probably have like 3 or 4 pages on your resume.
I have a
Student
CV
body
now.
president.
It's a
SGA
CV.
president.
Yeah.
You got a lot of
Still no
presidents
degree
on there,
though.
yeah. But you've been like 8 presidents. I think you're good.
Yeah. No, a lot of good experience.
Yeah.
A lot of good experience. I still got work to do.
Yeah, you're still like I was telling you earlier. It's like you hit like a checkpoint and you're able to like kind of see it and appreciate it, but
Right.
then you're just like, oh, this is now I can like this is now the jumping off point for the next thing.
Right.
It's like I got to undertake something even bigger now.
Definitely. Planning my next move.
Yeah. Oh, any podcast exclusive?
Podcast exclusive. Well, I think I want my next job to be some type of diversity leader for a school system. I think that my work has positioned me well to be able to influence like large systems and help them with their diversity work, whether that be through curriculum, admissions, hiring, finances, but being able to examine the functions of an organization through a diversity lens.
Yeah.
That's what I think my next job will be. But I've been doing GLSEN for 12 years, love it, and I think I'm ready to eventually, in maybe a year or two, pass that on and move on to that.
Yeah. Spread your wings.
Let's see.
Actually, fun. You mentioned earlier that there was a certain I'm gonna fuck up this acronym like I always do. The GLCCB.
Very good.
Was that it?
That was it.
Hell
that
yeah.
was spot on.
So you felt as if a certain amount of it, I'm gonna use the word hijacked, was kind of taken to mean something else in its later. Do you feel like there's any element of the movement in general that is still kind of hijacked, that isn't true to what the original movement is supposed to be about?
I mean, the biggest yes, that was a great question. And so much of the movement is still hijacked. I mean, so much of our society is still, led and steeped in a way that doesn't consider all voices. And of course, if that permeates, all of society, it's going to get inside of the LGBT community too. And so, the LGBT community, which is supposed to be about equity and justice, there's still so many isms that occur within that community. I mean, racism is huge in the LGBT community, ageism, sexism, I mean, all of that stuff. And so I think that it's important to criticize and hold accountable large LGBT organizations like the HRC, like GLSEN, like Trevor Project, to not, co-opt and appropriate and benefit from the struggles of Black LGBT folks, and lead their organizations in such a way where they're doing real change. So, my culture at the GLCCB is we have to center our efforts on people who are most vulnerable. That just makes sense to do the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And I think that a lot of the movement is still hijacked by kind of what white folks want to do. I mean, look at marriage equality. Marriage equality was lauded as a huge success for the LGBT community, but think of all the things that have to be in place for you to be able to consider marriage. You have to have a certain amount of economic stability, housing stability. You have to be able to find love and pay for a wedding and all of these things. And even though it did show that, gay people can get married, that's great, that maybe wasn't on the top of the list for a lot of Black gay folks on their agenda. And so we're definitely seeing that Black folks and trans folks have to play second fiddle to what I guess the large LGBT movement is going towards.
What would be the thing that could get passed that you would see as a major stepping stone in that direction?
Well, I think it's going to be a while for Black folks to be respected at all in anything. But I think that transgender students really have a chance. So I think that some type of sweeping legislation that were to say that trans and gender nonconforming students are able to use the restrooms, and not even just students, but transgender people, can't be discriminated against for their gender identity. We still have states where you can be fired, just for being LGBT. So having some sort of sweeping legislation, some anti or non-discrimination law that protects transgender people, I think has a real shot, at being passed. And so I would like to see that.
I think a lot of the opposition, and it's really intriguing to talk to you about this because, I mean, I just these conversations. I mean, people kind of get caught in their own little social circles, and they just kind of, that's just the way they think
echo
about
chambers.
things. You know what I'm saying? I think it is intriguing that you mentioned. I think that a lot of the opposition you see from, whatever opposing groups you see to the so-called movement are people opposing the legislation of those who aren't necessarily representing the ideals of the group, if that makes any sense. So like you see, how can I make this make sense? Let's find out. Stay tuned.
Live podcast.
Can't wait. Sips beer.
So yeah, good point. I'll take a sip. For this one.
Let's all take a sip.
There's obviously a large I mean it's a hot button issue. It's a hot button topic, particularly the transgender issue.
For sure.
Particularly. I mean the gay marriage issue, I wouldn't say it's been, but like the gay marriage issue is pretty much, I mean, it's a federal law at this point, right?
Yeah.
Like you have a lot of the people. I would say that the majority of opposition you see from people who are opposed to any type of progress that you make, they're opposed to it because of the sentiments that are voiced by people that aren't necessarily representative of what people like you are talking about. And I think that goes for both sides. I think there's kind of a misrepresentation on both sides. So you have people that, for instance, there was a very popular bill, or a very widely infamous bill passed in Canada about like it was like Bill C-16, about the whole, like, it made it illegal to address people by, anything other than the pronoun they associated by. Yeah. That was a big hot button issue.
Sure.
And I was wondering, is that something that you personally feel convicted about, or is that something that you think isn't quite getting the point of what this is all about?
I mean, yes, I think that it is getting to the point of what it's all about. Will having a law that respects people's pronouns fix all the discrimination that transgender people face? No. But is a step in the right direction? Sure. I believe that, when you are required to, and I mean, it's a pity that we have to require it, but when you use the correct pronouns with a transgender person, you effectively see them and recognize them as the person they are. There's nothing more humane than that. And so I think a law like that gets to the humanity piece of it, is that this is a person and we are requiring you to see this person and respect this person. So that I can get on board with. And I mean, if it ever came to public referendum, I'd vote for it. But is it going to stop trans women from being murdered? Maybe not. Is it going to stop trans people from not being able to get housing because of, real estate discrimination or employment discrimination? Maybe not. But certainly I'll take it.
I think, and that, I guess, and it's interesting to see, because I feel like a lot of the argument centers around these kind of moral issues where people receive so much opposition to the idea that their speech should be controlled or anything like that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That I almost feel like it forces, like listening to you talk right now. Listening to you talk, I don't think there's any sensible person that would hear the things that you say and say, no, that's wrong. You know what I'm saying?
Good.
You know what I'm saying? It's just like, absolutely, of course.
Right.
Of course. But in my opinion, from my perspective,
right,
I see these things as kind of, I use the word again, I feel like it gets hijacked to a point where it causes opposition, where people, because for the longest time, even though we say we're a country that isn't like separation of church and state, law should have nothing to do with your morality, with your religious beliefs, or anything like that. But naturally, because humans are humans, they're not going to necessarily oppose something that aligns with their beliefs. Mm-hmm. So if somebody enforces a law that is clearly biased towards one belief system than another, you're not going to receive too much opposition from the belief system that benefits from it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Of course.
And so you see a large amount of people that now when they're faced with these type of laws like that, where it's actually a legislated position,
Right.
it's you can't call somebody this, you can't call somebody that. It forces this kind of polarization where it's like, well, no, now I was all for it until you told me that now I can't fucking say this or that the other thing, because that just goes against my freedom of expression.
Yeah.
But in reality, I guess what they're not realizing is, well, the laws up to this point have been completely benefiting your freedom of expression at the expense of others.
Right.
But then the opposing argument to that is, well, is the solution to that to just swing it equally the other way, or is it to meet somewhere on a middle ground? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would hazard to say that using the correct pronoun when you're speaking to someone wouldn't be indicative of a super, polarizing switch to the other side.
Absolutely not.
But
yeah.
I think it sort of like moves the pendulum a little closer in such a way. Like, I see what you're saying. If somebody fundamentally doesn't believe that transgender people are a thing, then why, by you using the correct pronoun, you in some ways acknowledge them as a transgender person. And of course, there's a difference between doing it on accident and like doing it on purpose.
And I think that's the main point.
Yeah.
I think what you said is perfect. I think that there's a definite distinction between, there's a distinction between, in my eyes, from someone who's doing it maliciously, and it's the same thing that goes with bullying in schools.
Definitely.
In my opinion, and a lot of the legislation that's been passed, bullying in schools is something that should be addressed. Obviously.
Yeah.
Look, I wasn't bullied terribly in school. Like, I was made fun of, but like it wasn't hazardous to my life.
Right.
But it exists, and kids
and it's
suffer.
hazardous to a lot of
It's
kids' lives,
absolutely.
It wasn't like physical; it was emotional bullying.
Well,
is what
You didn't
you're
get beat
saying.
up.
but even so, like for me, it was just, I don't know. It doesn't like I'm coming from a place where kids are bullied for anything,
Sure.
anything. And I was bullied for my reasons, and other kids are bullied for their reasons. And one could make the argument that any kind of bullying is hazardous, whether it's for your sexual identity or gender identification or anything. One could absolutely make the argument. I think what people get caught up in is that once you make it a law, and I get the sense from this conversation that, like from the answer you just gave me, you were saying like, yeah, sure, it's a step in the right direction. I don't get the sense that you're like entirely like, this needs to be a fucking law, because I think that you're kind of on the same page as I am. Like, does this really actually solve any problems at the end of the day? Is this really the thing that we need right now? Is this really is this the way we solve the issues in the transgender community or the LGBT community, by dictating what you're allowed to say or anything like that? And I do honestly, as someone who consumes a lot of that side of the coverage of it,
Right.
there legitimately is, and I think this is a major flaw in again the polarization of society, is that there is sense on both sides. And I think that a lot of it gets lost in, well, if you're on this side, then you suck.
Right.
If you're on that side, then you're a good person or anything like that. And I think that's because the moves that are made are such, I don't know, it's like it doesn't appear to me to be the move that needs to be made. And I think that a lot of the opposition could be avoided if people were just say, look, kids need a place that a kid who's going to public school, especially a child, 5 through whatever age, they need to be able to feel like they can go to public school and not be marginalized because of their sexual identity or anything like that.
Right.
And I completely agree with that.
Right.
And a lot of the opposition kind of falls in the argument, was like, well, once you're telling me how to conduct myself contrary to my beliefs, then you're falling on this whole thing where it's like, now you're marginalizing me. Does that make sense?
No, I think that makes sense, and definitely makes sense. But I guess I come from the mind that like some beliefs are just wrong, and some beliefs are just not welcome, and some beliefs lead to just nothing but death, hate, and destruction. And it's those beliefs that we have to vehemently, fight against. And once it's dangerous to get into this whole like liberalism idea of like everyone can do whatever they want, have their own beliefs, and think what you think and think what I think, and like we'll be happy. That can't be a thing because the world that we live in is not equal and just, and we can't trust people to just be able to do that. And some beliefs just aren't welcome. There are some people who believe death and destruction to people who identify with different races, religions, and I can't have, a respectful conversation with that person and say, well, this is just what you believe, right? That like you think this person should die and I should just respect that. I'm going to say, no, your belief is not welcome. Your belief is wrong. And I'm going to fight, to make sure that your belief is not upheld. So I think some beliefs just aren't a thing.
I agree with you in a sense. And on the same sense, do you not see how that way of thinking could potentially be dangerous?
I think that it would make the people who have those beliefs probably kind of angry. But I think that when we zoom out, those people aren't being affected in the same way.
But they could be.
How?
What I'm saying is once the balance of society is sway the other way, once one belief system is accepted over another, then you just have composed yourself a new oppressed group. The goal here would eventually be to have no oppressed group, right? If that's the ultimate goal of society, that everyone exists equally with the equal freedoms to believe what they want to believe, and everything like that. So you could see how if one group, and look, again, I'm coming from this a place where I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to approach this from a state where it's like I'm trying to address the sentiments of those who may oppose you, and not necessarily because they oppose you, but because they oppose the principle of what's being done.
Yeah.
And I think that the most effective way of getting what needs to be done is to address all those people's beliefs, not just one side. Not because I think once you say, okay, well, look, we've come to a point now where we have decided this is the way you need to think, and if you don't think like this, you're not welcome in this discussion.
Right.
Then you've effectively marginalized an entire group of people who are not going to feel good about that. And I'm not saying it's because they're good people, if that makes any sense.
I mean, I think then I would retort like, but have you though? Right? Like, in order to have this conversation, you have to acknowledge a couple of things as truth. And one of those things is the power structures that exist in our society. Some of those things that are just obvious, that we just know. When we talk about oppression, we talk about there's a group that has some type of societal power and a group that doesn't. And today, I think that we obviously see that people who are male, people who are white, people who are middle upper class, able-bodied, cisgender, heterosexual, in so many of the world systems have the upper hand. And not only is it an upper hand, it's a strong upper hand. Those people are not losing their lives. They're not getting jobs. They are able to traverse through society with no hardship, relatively, right? Because everybody has poverty and sickness and things like that. But on the grand scheme of things, we have to acknowledge that power systems exist. And once you acknowledge that those power systems exist, you understand that once we let the people who are oppressed be heard, there's really no way that the people who have been in power forever won't still be. And I think that there's a lot of nervousness around giving up that power. That in our society, there's no way that, people who are black or trans or gay are ever going to have the same amount of societal power that people that, are white, cisgender, straight will ever have. And I think that those narratives of, let's all be equal. Once you stop listening to me and now listening to you, all we've done is just switch the speaker, right? That we're listening to somebody else. But I don't think that it's really as equal as that. Our society isn't set up equally that way. So there isn't just this person is heard, this person isn't. And then once we switch that, the person who is no longer heard has to give up their power. I don't really see that happening.
That was very profound.
That was profound.
Thank
I was
you.
like, I've just been on like the edge of my seat this entire conversation. I've just been listening.
It's good.
Like,
It's good.
It's been like, this is deep.
Yeah. No, these are the conversations that need to be had for sure. For sure. Because, I mean, I think any part of having a good conversation is knowing the opposition, right? And I think if you're going to be able to navigate and argue these issues, you have to anticipate what the other side says and thinks and really be able to know that in order to form your own arguments. But, you know.
I guess the main, I don't know, the fork in the road between what I'm sensing to be my line of thinking and your line of thinking is, I personally believe that the example of what comes to mind to me is the example of, when gay marriage is a big issue, which I think has been kind of overshadowed by the transgender movement in a way. Because at the end of the day, gay marriage issue kind of won in a way. I mean, you could say it won. I mean, at a federal level, they won. Obviously,
Yeah.
it may not completely benefit those. May have that whole issue of, like if a Christian bakery, for instance, refused to service for a gay marriage, that they could be prosecuted for that or something like that. I think that's where people then think, well, that now I really do. I do hate to harp on the point because but at the same time, this is the point that people harp on.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, this is something that people will focus on, because at the end of the day, it really comes down to, at the end of the day, everybody is really just concerned with their ability to be what they want to be.
Yeah.
Whether you're gay, whether you're straight or anything, everybody just, at the end of the day, all anybody wants is freedom. Everybody just wants to be who they want to be, and they don't want anybody to infringe upon that. Mm-hmm. So when they see things happening, like, okay, now and look, I'm not completely, I truly believe that at the end of the day, in a battle of idea, that's the way you win things. I don't think it's by legislation. I don't think that laws change the public sentiment. I truly don't. I think that it's a cultural elevation where people then begin, okay, you start to recognize certain things. And I think that when you get to a point where, I think once you start to force those things by law, then you have in fact created a new oppressed group. And you could certainly make the argument that, well, that group could never be oppressed because, they have the benefit in society.
Definitely.
For sure. But they don't necessarily feel that way.
Right. And so we can't make decisions based on the fact that people aren't feeling that way, even though it's like the truth. Like, that's what's happening. Like, the very definition of oppression is having a group that is in power and being constantly belittled and embattered in a bind of systems. And the people who oppose these laws will never be in that bind by agreeing to these things. Like, for example, let's say that there is the classes in power, the white, straight, upper class man, right? Mm-hmm. Is he going to be able to be any less of what he wants to be by selling that cake to that gay couple?
Well, I don't think it comes down to that. I think it comes down to, at the end of the day, I don't think anybody should be forced into anything that they don't agree with. So if you are getting married in a homosexual marriage, I don't believe that anybody has the right to impede you from that. Yeah. At the same time, I don't think that anybody has the right to tell somebody who disagrees with that they have to participate in that, if that makes any sense.
Okay. I mean, I see that, but I think that if we were to look at this issue in the lens of, let's say, other civil rights issues, right? Like, whereas the law of the land is that certain restaurants could only have white patrons. And let's say that there is a restaurant owner that just doesn't believe that black people should be able to eat at his restaurant.
Let's just make this like a real world scenario. So, like, if you were having a wedding or like whatever event, and like it's for an LGBT cause, you wouldn't get Chick-fil-A catering because they're a very religious organization. They don't really accept gay rights and
Right.
stuff. They've had active protests, so it's like, I guess that's, I don't know if they're.
I mean, for that, I would say I'm
they
a
will
consumer.
do it. They will do it, but their stance on it. So I guess it's down to the consumer to
Right.
choose that. So I guess just to go along with Jimmy's thing, or like the pizza shop that like there's like a news report of that contacted a pizza shop and was like, hey, I want to get pizzas for me and my husband's wedding, and there's like no wedding, and they're like, no, we won't do it. And then they just like wrote a piece being like, these people won't cater for a wedding. And
Yeah.
it's like, they're also a pizza shop, so
Yeah.
who has pizza at a wedding? But
Bad
You're already
gays.
fucking up. You're already fucking up. Already
But
fucking
Gays
up.
are better than that.
but also still, it's like still down to the consumer. Like whatever's like, if something's good, it'll sell. But if the consumer also doesn't like the practice of a company, they're not going to do it anyway. So it's kind of gets down to basic capitalism of like, all right, if the owner of that company sucks, no one's going to go there anyway.
Yeah.
So
I'll
that
use a
takes
very
care of that,
real
I guess.
example. Oh yeah. Thank you. My bad. I'm terrible at tossing. I'm sorry. Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws they were government instated. Now, granted, there were obviously people in the South there was obviously a large portion of people, particularly in the South, that would not have wanted to serve black patrons.
For sure.
But economically speaking, if you're a restaurant owner, it's not feasible to maintain double bathrooms, double sections, all these things. It costs you extra money. And so a lot of, I think that was an example of the government overstepping their boundaries, because the government literally said, no, you are not legally allowed to host these patrons unless under these conditions. You cannot legally have black people in your restaurant unless you have this section available. That was the Jim Crow laws and things like that. And a lot of the Southern business owners didn't want that because it cost them more money to do so. I'm thinking in a real world example, if I were to open up a shop right now and say, Jim's Donuts, no gays allowed, I do wonder how many people would attend that restaurant.
I mean, yeah, but as I remember it, Jim Crow laws weren't real laws, right? They were just a nickname given to policies and practices that were practiced by people in communities that were racist.
But they were government mandated.
I don't believe Jim Crow laws, prohibited or required people to segregate when they didn't want to, right? There were places where there weren't segregation.
This isn't my place to say because I don't know for sure, but I feel like it might have been the case. And I could be wrong.
Right.
I could be wrong. But I feel like there were legitimate laws passed in public policy that said that no, this is how we do things here.
I mean, but the thing is, they weren't federal also. Like,
They weren't
It was
federal.
mainly just in the South.
Yeah, these were...
They were in the South.
these were local
but they
policies.
did make people in a certain area have to abide by a system of rules that were
Sure.
not based in, first of all, not based in constitutionality. If you abide by everybody's created equal or anything like that.
Right. But I mean, back to the point of like, people should not be forced to do what they don't want to do. Eventually the law realized that Jim Crow laws and laws of that sort were unconstitutional and were bad. And so that law changed. And so we can't say that, business owners should be allowed to continue to segregate because they just believe that they should. The law, I think, has a function to take the side of the people. The law has a function to create the society that we want. And the society that we want is one where everyone feels validated and whole and free and respected. And there are some laws that don't do that. And so we have to combat against those laws. So, business owners that can just refuse service to gay couples, well, that's not the world we want to live in. And the law has, I think, a responsibility to protecting people who are vulnerable and taking a bold step on the side of what's right. And what's right is being able, if you're going to be in business, to practice fair business.
To play a devil's advocate, the law does allow those people to seek out another business.
True. But I think that, why should the person who is already persecuted be forced to seek another business when really refusing service to this one group and upholding it means that you agree that those things are okay? And I think that we don't want to have citizens in America who have to play hot potato with bakeries, searching to find someone who will see them and respect them as a person and bake them a cake. That's not the type of country that I think anyone would want to live in. And so I think the law has a responsibility to make sure that it doesn't happen. Because that's just not nice.
It isn't nice.
Yeah.
It's not
You're right.
nice.
It isn't nice. It isn't
Not
nice.
nice.
It isn't nice.
Yeah, especially the way I plan things, where it's just all at the last minute.
Yeah.
I'm relying on that one bakery
That's
just
right.
to do it right.
And you have to be like, oh, you have to go to another bakery. It's like,
You
damn.
just have to be pissed off while you're talking to the
Right.
next bakery.
Come on. Or pizza shops. I mean, Domino's does have that tracker.
Yeah, if the name looks fishy, I'll
Yeah.
usually send someone else.
Mr.
to get
and
the pizza.
Mr.
Yeah.
What? Cancel.
I just mean like the delivery driver's name. It's like Trevor or something. I don't like the
Trevor.
Trevor's always a douche name.
Chad.
Chad's
Chad's
a
a
bad
douchey
one.
name.
It is a douchey name.
Yeah.
Don't deliver pizzas in my house, dude.
Yeah. Stay away, Chad.
Come nowhere near me. But if your name looks like it could also pop up in my Uber or Lyft app, I know that pizza's getting there quick.
That's right. That's right.
That's true. I will stand by what I say under the principle that once you set the precedent that a certain system of beliefs, well, I guess, no, you might be right about that, because there is a system of beliefs that is
Just
set.
watching Jimmy change his mind. This is beautiful.
This is
we
great.
Have video image of it.
On air.
Yeah.
Cool.
It is very, like, I hope you can understand why I'm so caught up in this, and it's not because of anything other than I'm just legitimately from a moral standpoint just very perturbed by it. I don't want to see the precedent set that one system of beliefs dictates an entire society's system of beliefs, only because in an ideal society, in my ideal society, everyone is free to believe what they choose to believe.
And I think that sounds beautiful, right? But today, as society is, do you believe that you suffer from the current system that exists?
Probably not, no. But I believe that I could.
You believe that you could?
Absolutely.
And I think that is one of the big columns of why this conversation is difficult and frustrating for people who already are in positions of power. You know, power and supremacy is intoxicating. And people who have power, the most horrible thing to happen to them is them losing that power. And then if you think about the people who don't have it at all, asking for a little bit of it, obviously the person who has it is going to say, well, no, because what if I give you too much?
True.
And then
True.
what if I end up in the same way that you are? And for that isn't seeking a system of equality. that is understanding that you don't want to give up, the privileges that you possess for fear that one day you might not have them. But that is not hearing the voice of the people who don't have them right now.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the way our society is set up, I can't see any day where, that can be the case. And if it is, then why isn't that deserved, right? Why isn't that deserved? If people of color can live through hundreds of years of oppression and persecution and being silenced, then why can't you?
Well, I guess at that point it just becomes like is that really what we're aiming for right now? Are we aiming for, well, we did it, so like we had to go through it, so should you, type of thing. Like the society went so far this way that our solution is to make it now you're going to have to deal with it so far that way. I don't think it's a jersey because at the end of the day, I'm not approaching this from a standpoint where I'm like, I'm scared to see you have a certain amount of power or LGBT or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, look, these are the facts. These are the facts of reality. The facts of reality is this is the way society was conducted for so long.
Right.
And it sucks. It sucks that so many people, that this group of people had the privilege of dictating the laws by which everyone else had to abide. I don't personally agree that the solution to that is saying, okay, well now you got to put up with the laws that I say have to go. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, I think that sounds bad, but in reality, how it would play out is I don't think that any civil rights activist is saying, okay, now let's make white folks slaves, right?
Well,
like it's not like totally like that. It's let's have a little bit of the piece of the pie so that we are able to live full lives just as, people who can live full lives can. And I think that it's not necessarily, the goal isn't to shift the power to where white folks now feel oppressed. That's not the goal.
Yeah, not white folks or anything.
Or anybody who's in any power, white, cis, straight, whatever. That's not the goal of any of, I think, these movements. The goal of the movement is to now be at a place of equity and a place where people who are oppressed are able to realize similar lives that people who aren't. That's really all oppressed people want, is a chance at equity. And I think that sometimes that translates to people who do have power is they have to give up some of theirs in order to give somebody else's. And what if it gets so much where, the other person has more? But I think that the goal is to make everyone be able to feel fulfilled and whole and free. And some of these laws, like, the cake, the transgender pronouns, segregation, were all aims at making that happen. Right, so it's not that like now only white folks can go in the back door. It's now everybody can go in the front door, and I think that is kind of what the goal is to have equity.
Except when you run across those situations, like for instance, like I'll bring up the case of like the whole, you're familiar with like Milo Yiannopoulos and stuff like that, like conservative speakers that come to campus and things like that, and then they kind of get like there kind of gets this mantra of like you're not allowed to speak here, anything like that.
Right.
Do you feel like that's appropriate?
Absolutely. Back to the whole thought that like some beliefs aren't welcome. I think that beliefs that spew out of Milo, whatever his name is, mouth, are ones that are dangerous and violent and translate to violence for oppressed communities. And colleges and large, institutions have to take that stance and say, yes, this speech is actually not welcome here because it does not contribute to uplifting everybody, and it actually is violent and it is dangerous. A lot of the things that he says are.
I think what's dangerous is when a certain group of people is allowed to decide what is allowed and what isn't.
Yeah, but isn't that what we're living in now?
Sure. It doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it right. I'm not saying that the place we live in right now is right. What I'm saying is that, again, all I've ever been, like I said, like I find it hard to play the devil's advocate only because like I really do agree with everything you're saying.
Yeah, but it's important to look at the other side.
It is important to observe like why people think the way they do. Mm-hmm. Is it safe is it safe? Because when I look at societies throughout history, the most tyrannical societies, the societies that are most controlled, and the societies that become most corrupt are the societies with the most limitation on what you're allowed to say. If you look throughout Nazi Germany, North Korea, if you look throughout communist Russia or anything like that, the most tyrannical societies are the societies that have dictated these are the right ways to think, and if you think anything other than this, you're not allowed to say that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so it's easy to say, well, we're just gonna go ahead and say that this person's thought is too ridiculous for anyone to listen to, and therefore we're gonna limit that. I think that's a bad precedent to set. That makes any sense? Because what you've done is you've limited the dialogue, and I guess it comes down to a major differential in ways of thinking. I would think that as humanity progresses in the battle of ideas, somebody wins and somebody loses, not by limiting the ability of the other side to speak, but by defeating them logically and saying, no, this is clearly how it is. This is how it is. And if you can't beat me on a logical standpoint, then you lose. But otherwise, then you're saying, well, I'm just not going to allow you to even say what you think. Does that make sense?
I mean, it makes sense, but I think that also we have to look at the context. And for Milo, whatever, to speak at a college campus is very different than limiting someone's constitutional right to speech. And I think that Milo has plenty of opportunities to speak as much as he wants because that isn't what is being threatened. The First Amendment isn't being threatened. I think that private...
Is it not, though?
No, I would say that not having Milo speak at a college campus is not threatening the First Amendment at all. What's threatening the First Amendment is when we look at public speech and censorship and things like that. You know, Milo has his own little website and his blogs or whatever he does. Shutting those down, I think, would be indicative of some type of constitutional infringement.
Sure.
But every group has a right to decide who's going to be on the stage and who's not. And we have to make those decisions based on, what's right. I think that, like, for example, any public institution would not invite an ISIS speaker to come about how America should die and should kill all Americans. I don't know anybody who would want to sit and listen to that and be like, this is free speech and we just want to hear this person out. And so I think that people have to make those decisions, and I applaud, groups making decisions to have speech that doesn't align with their values heard. So Milo has plenty of opportunities to speak however he wishes because of the First Amendment. But individual colleges and groups have a right to choose not to allow those types of things to be
Wouldn't
heard.
you say that individual, let's say, Christian bakeries have that same right to choose who they wish to serve?
I think that if a college campus is hiring a speaker, they're not providing a public service, right? And so they're not really in the same business.
Neither is a bakery.
I mean, a bakery, I think, does provide a service to the public.
It's a business.
Cakes.
It's a business. It's a business. It's their own business. I'm not talking. Look. When I talk about discrimination, I'm not talking about like a public institution like University of Maryland or Towson High School. I'm talking about like me, Jim Selesky, decided to start a business, and that business is making cakes. Yeah. Once someone is allowed to say, well, Jim Selesky's thoughts are so wrong that we're not going to allow him, we're not even going to allow him to think what he thinks. I think that's infringing. This is what I was getting at. I think it's infringing upon the same right that you're claiming that these... So like when you say that these colleges have the right to say, no, we disagree with what he's saying, and therefore we are going to say he can't speak here. Agreed. Yeah. These institutions funded by certain places, you could make the argument that absolutely they have the right to say, no, you can't speak here. You could also make the argument that a considerable amount of people who are also paying tuition invited him there and wanted him to speak there. And so by saying he can't speak there because this percentage of your campus is protesting it, then now therefore the other percentage of your campus that wanted to hear him is now marginalized because they're not allowed to listen to it. Right. You could make that argument, but at the same time you're also conceding the argument that by saying that they have the right to dictate who's allowed to speak and what beliefs are allowed to be voiced, you are also admitting that so does everyone else. Otherwise, it's unfair. Because if you're saying that, well, no, colleges have the right to dictate what belief systems they agree with and who they allowed to speak. However, a private bakery does not.
Right.
Now you're infringing on the... You see what I'm coming from? Do you see what I'm
I see
saying?
what you're saying, but I think that your point of view is relying on a very equal logic system and a very equal approach to how the world works. Whereas if this, then that, and if not this, then not that, and if one side gets it, then the other side does, and if it doesn't get it, then the other side does not. And it would be nice if the world worked that way, but the world just isn't equal. So unfortunately, laws don't operate in equal ways. And so, yes, I believe that it is completely okay for a college campus or whatever to say, yes, I'm making this decision to not have this speaker. And I equally think it's okay for a bakery not to be allowed to discriminate against their customers. Because, again, the law and policies have to be on the bold side of the people who need the work, and have to be on the side of the people that align with the values that we want to have. And if the law doesn't do that, then what is it doing? Has to do that.
Yeah, it is supposed to be there for the underdog.
It's supposed to be there for everybody. That's the job of the law.
It's supposed to be, yeah.
It's supposed to be.
But we understand.
I agree
that,
with.
like,
I
it
agree
totally
with you.
isn't.
I
Right.
agree with you that it's not. But
Right.
at the same time, I just do you at least at the very least see where I'm coming from?
Oh no, I know. I see where you're coming. Like the logic makes sense, but like in a vacuum, it only works, right? Like in the actual world, we can't operate that way. So like we have to recognize the inequities in the law and the inequities of society, and have them be able to link, because we can't just pretend like everything is equal and make laws that pretend that, because that's unfortunately not how it is.
Okay.
I'll take one more beer.
Yeah, good for you. They're still cold.
I don't want it to splooge all over me this time.
Oh, be careful. It's going to.
I saw your technique. You opened it very
Yeah.
slowly.
Yeah. I just want
might be
to
lucky
take a
now.
quick second and just say that I'm so thankful you came here.
Yeah, this is really
Yeah,
wonderful.
thank you so much for coming.
This is so
Absolutely.
cool. This is so cool. It really is.
I mean,
And
it is. We're just
like-
chilling. We're drinking beers. We're talking about the problems of the world. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a summer night.
Doesn't feel too hot.
Right.
It's nice. The fan's on though. It's great.
I've gotten in.
Someone's mowing their lawn at like
Right.
11:30 at
Right.
night.
That's so strange. How can they see?
Whoa.
I don't know.
How can they see what they're mowing?
Oh, I think you might get Revenge of the Foam.
Nah, dude.
No,
I controlled
there
it.
you
I've
go.
learned. I've learned how
I
to.
also had similar success.
Would you care for another fug?
I would.
Hell
Thank you
Yeah.
for providing beer and Newports.
Yeah, man, this has been a good cast.
Treated.
No, it's
Yeah, for
fantastic. This is honestly everything I could have hoped for. Just to have this kind of conversation, because and it's a value that I have. It's just a conversation that that I don't see being had, because
Yeah.
clearly we're coming at this from two different perspectives. It's obvious at this point, you know. It's very clear, you know. But again, I will say this. I mean, you bore witness to this. When I that whole thing with like the kid dressing up in drag on
Oh,
Facebook and
yeah.
stuff like that.
Mhm,
Yeah, I knew that was a thing. I knew that was gonna be a thing. Like I was praying to God that you didn't see that, because I was scared that you would be like, I am not going on Jimmy's. I'm not going on this podcast. You know what I'm saying?
No.
I really was. It was a legitimate concern of
Yeah.
mine, only because, in my opinion, what I voiced was again, it might not be right, but in my opinion, what I voiced was a legitimate point, and I feel like it was met with this kind of, well, actually, the reason you think that is because you're homophobic and you're this, that, the other thing, and you just aren't. Basically, in so many words, it was basically you're not equipped to have this conversation because
Right.
your morals aren't in alignment with our morals, and therefore you're just wrong. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I think that the opinion of the dissent wasn't necessarily that your morals don't prepare you for this conversation. It was your understanding, right? It was the knowledge. It was the theoretical and conceptual understanding of sexuality, of identity, of drag culture. And I think that it was your lack of knowledge around that birthed your opinions that people didn't agree with, and those other people did have that knowledge. And so, and they did get a little ad hominem, right? They were like,
Yeah.
you this, you that. But these are, keyboard warriors, right?
Yeah,
Who,
absolutely,
aren't
absolutely.
having,
I paid close
respectful
attention to what
discourse.
you said versus what other people said.
Yeah, good. Yeah, because
to
I
be
wasn't
quite
trying
honest,
to call
I respect your
names.
opinion much more than I respected
appreciate
most of the
that.
people on that opinion.
I appreciate that. And again, my point was not about your morals. It was about my understanding of sexuality. And so, I mean, I guess we should describe what we're talking about, right? Like, Eric, did you hear about
I
this?
have no clue what's going on.
Take it away.
I'll see Jimmy post something. I'll like it out of moral support. And I won't look at it.
So there was this video of this young boy from Canada who's like 8 years old, and he's a drag queen. And he's giving an interview about how he's a drag queen. He's wearing makeup and a wig, and there's a scene of him doing Vogue dancing at this event. And he's on the ground, and he does like this twirl and twist on the ground. And then there's like this whole interview about like how he's a drag queen. And so Jimmy highlighted that it seems that the dancing that this young boy was doing seemed sexual, and possibly inappropriate for his development as a young person, because this culture and this environment seemed to force an 8-year-old boy to exude sexuality that perhaps wasn't appropriate for him. Did I word that?
It was good. Sound like Jimmy Selesky himself, right there.
Perfect. And a lot of folks, came back and they were like, no, that's not what this is. This is Vogue dancing, number one. Number two, often depictions of queer identity are quickly taken to a hypersexualized place. And just like realizing that maybe not like maybe that wasn't the kernel of what was happening in your brain, but just acknowledging that in society, when we talk about lesbian, gay issues, that typically people go to this hypersexualized understanding of that identities, that we brought that up. And then I also brought up the fact that children do have sexuality and that young people do express themselves in sexual ways, and it's important for adults to be able to mold and help young people understand themselves as sexual people, rather than, stifle that. And so that was like my whole point of view, that this young person was not doing anything sexual, not doing anything inappropriate, and that, it was fine. So that's kind of where we split in the road.
Yeah, I just I having no background in anything and coming from a very ignorant place with no knowledge, I just don't. I wouldn't know when it is like even for just the brain to be developed enough to understand sexuality.
Right.
So that's like where I coming from almost the same place where Jimmy is. I hear something like that, I'm like, well, like, is it a thing where like the parents are like making them get involved in it because it's something like with them wanting something, or is this really the kid's thing, or is
Right.
this it's.
And I think that was another opinion that was brought up that I absolutely do agree with, is that young people have autonomy and agency, and the decisions that they make don't come from their parents all the time, that sometimes it comes, directly from them. And also, like, if I saw a young, 8-year-old who was humping the floor and twerking and doing all that type of extremely sort of pornographic,
Yeah.
borderline stuff, then yeah, I'd have a problem with it. But a drag performance, particularly this drag performance, I believe the word Jimmy used was gyrating.
Was it just like kind of like runway, like kind of like
yeah, he was on the floor
like
and he did a
posing
twirl.
type stuff,
And
or-
I posted a video of like a girl who was doing gymnastics who was doing a similar stuff. And also gyrating is like moving your hips in kind of a sexual way. And I don't believe that's what this boy was doing. And so it was kind of like the performance that I saw seemed to be totally within bounds of, a drag performance and not any type of hypersexual or inappropriate thing. And some of the people on there said, well, it's because of your lens as a this, as a that, that you immediately think that this was hypersexualized. And that's kind of how
That's a good summation. It really is a good summation. I think I was approaching it more from a standpoint of like, I was observing the culture surrounding it, which I think that people weren't being honest about, in my opinion. I don't think that people were being honest about the amount of sexuality is present in a drag race that is not present in and again, look, I'm the same person that I find particularly like girl beauty pageants, like that's like a thing. They have like a televised like pageant moms or something like that on TLC, where it's like these moms who they just like have their daughters and stuff like that. Yeah. I find that to be kind of disturbing as well. I think it's kind of and the example that you brought up with gymnastics was kind of like I think for instance in gymnastics, appearance is one of the rated things that they like when they judge you.
Yeah.
They judge you, like part of the whole thing is appearance.
Yeah.
Which I think is like,
right.
Why are we judging 8-year-old girls by their appearance?
Yeah.
Like if they don't have enough makeup on or something like that. Right. Like why are we judging that as a thing? It to me, I guess in my opinion, I was coming at from a standpoint was like, this has nothing to do with the whole. This has nothing to do with the gay transgender aspect of things. For me, this has to do with like, this is just like an amount of, I don't know. It just didn't seem. It seemed dishonest for people because when you watch RuPaul's Drag Race and things like that, when you watch those shows, what you're seeing is like a lot of jokes being made about like giving head and stuff like that, and there's a lot of provocative sexuality brought into that theater that. When you bring the comparison to gymnastics, it's not present. However, I will concede that, gymnastics could necessarily be considered equally as inappropriate. My whole point was that it all seems inappropriate to me. It all seems wrong to me.
I mean, I can't disagree that, drag shows happen at gay bars, right? And gay bars are for 21 plus people who are dancing to explicit music and hooking up and doing all of those things. And the bar culture is one that is prevalent with drugs and sexuality and things like that. And for me, I can, conclude on that, but can't make the further conclusion that that world will in some way penetrate this young 8-year-old because I also respect the people in that community and respect the people in the room and understand boundaries and understanding that there's a difference between having a 27-year-old drag queen and an 8-year-old drag queen. And I can't start to slippery slope and say that, just because this 8-year-old is in this environment and is participating in this culture that sometimes is adjacent to sexuality, that then they will be in some way harmed by that. That's the connection that I don't have. And so a lot of that comes from trust of the community, of the adults, understanding of the community, that those things are unlikely to happen.
Don't you think that's a little bit like, again, you voice it from an opinion of like trust, like you're saying, like I trust that the gay community isn't going to be inappropriate about this.
Yeah.
I give the gay community the same credit I give any community, which is when you have an 8-year-old boy in the culture of bar culture, which we are both very familiar with. I don't see that as being healthy for someone that age to be I thought it was a very dishonest, and it wasn't you that made this comparison, but there were people who were saying things like, well, my my uncle does drag and he's completely straight and this, that, the other thing, and like there's a difference between this, that, the other thing. And I think that it's kind of discounting the fact that an 8-year-old child doesn't have that level of reference to work off. Like, yeah, your 45-year-old uncle is able to go to a place like that, like a nightclub, and do all the fun things. Like I said, like I wasn't being disingenuous when I said it. I was like, I would love to go to a drag show. To be quite honest, I've never been to a drag show.
Oh, you should go.
I would love to go to one. But at the same time,
I will take you to a drag show.
I hope you do. I really do hope you do. But
you got to bring some dollar bills.
I will, dude. Hey,
right.
dude, I've been to clubs before, dude. I'm used to spending the dollar.
You got to pay them for their performance.
But exactly, that's what I'm saying. To me, it was like this kind of same element as like bringing a kid. And I know, look, I won't compare it to a strip club entirely, but
you already have.
I kind of already have.
You just did
bring in the dollar bill.
Yeah, but let me tell you about the dollar bills though, right? Because this is an aspect of the drag community that maybe people don't hear or know. The drag community isn't all about performance and collecting dollar bills, right? Mm-hmm. The drag community was a life-saving mechanism for young LGBT people, where young, gay folks, lesbian folks, trans folks could not feel a part of anything, and they felt their most real and their most authentic selves when they were able to perform in drag. And we know that, Stonewall riots, that whole thing that happened in 1969, which a lot of people regard as the birth of the gay rights movement. Are you all familiar with this thing? New York City. Yeah. A bar was raided by police. It had been raided, several times.
Some weird mafia shit going on too.
Definitely.
Right?
Definitely. There was like an understanding between, either the bar owners and the mafia at the time. And any time that the mafia didn't make good on the police demands, then the police would raid the bar.
Yeah.
And it was drag queens that lost their lives, right? And that were brutalized and hit the pavement and were beaten up by police. And so the dollar bills isn't really like just this performance of selling myself, selling my body, selling my performance, but it's an aspect of survival. And we continue the practice of giving dollar bills because we understand that, hey, a lot of drag queens do it to make a little extra money. That, of course, society isn't always equal for people who are LGBT. And so it's from that understanding of the drag community that we offer the dollar bills, not, oh my God, you're so sexy, let me tip you, strip club. And it's important to be able to keep those barriers really clear in your mind so that you understand the drag performance as what it is. You understand a strip club as what it is. But you also understand that if an 8-year-old is being invited to give a performance, obviously they're probably coming with their parents, with other adults. They're being escorted in, they're escorted out. And that doing it in such a way that enhances personal development and not in a way that, is meant to harm this young person. And if they decide to grow up and become a drag queen and do the circuit, to all the gay bars, then great. But being able to understand the opportunity for what it was and not, having other understandings of it.
I think that the what you just voiced is incredibly, it's true, and I agree with it. I agree with it entirely. I think that you may be giving an 8-year-old a little bit too much credit for being able to differentiate between the two.
I don't know. Remember, I teach 8-year-olds, right? I'm a teacher, and I spend a lot of time with young people, and I think that if we gave more young people more credit and more agency and more freedom to be themselves, the only person hung up about it are adults, right? These young people aren't hung up about it, and there is not evidence or research that suggests, having young people grow up, let's say, in gay households or around gay culture or anything of the sort is harmful for them. But there is research that suggests that young people who are able to be autonomous about their lives have, better outcomes. And so I would hazard, to say that we're giving that young person an appropriate amount of responsibility about their lives. We know that young people understand themselves as sexual people as early as 2, 3, or 4. And so an 8-year-old being able to make decisions about how he wants to spend his life, I think that we as adults should maybe listen more and give young people that agency and that autonomy to make those decisions. I'm all for that.
I agree. I guess the main dividing line is education versus exposure. I'm very thankful to my upbringing for my father told me about sex and what sex was from a very young age. You know, I was aware, and I've brought it up before on the podcast, that perhaps I was made aware of sex from possibly too young of an age. You know, where I was curious about something, and my father was the type of guy who he was like, "You want to know about it? I'll tell you about it."
Right.
Like, and he told me about what sex was and everything that goes into it from the age of 6. I think the same thing could be applied to drugs. I think that I don't know of any evidence, like scientific evidence, that could be displayed, but I think there probably is something that could say that, you know, kids that are educated about drugs from young, and in an honest fashion, not like the whole like reefer madness type of like
Sure.
sexual education,
Right.
like weed's gonna make you go insane, versus just saying like what my dad did was like, my dad used to tell me, he was like, dude, Jim, drugs are fun. Drugs are fun. If drugs weren't fun, nobody would do them. Nobody would do drugs if they weren't fun. Like anybody who's trying to tell you that, like, because it deludes a child's sense of what is really going on. When you try to tell a kid that sexuality doesn't exist or drugs don't exist and drugs are just done by crazy people who are just thinking crazy fucking things, it becomes dishonest. And then, of course, inevitably, they're going to come to a point in their life when they become exposed to it. They're going to become exposed to that culture, and if they haven't been brought about with the right upbringing, then they're not going to know how to handle it. I think, however, there's a major difference between exposing to someone or educating them somebody. For instance, you can educate somebody about the drug culture, but there's a major difference between educating somebody or smoking crack in front of them. I think there's a big fucking difference. And so, in my opinion, that was equivalent to like, no, I'm not only going to... if you're going to... Look, I'm not educated enough in the subject to raise an argument against whether or not we should be teaching kids that it's okay to not identify as a gender, because like I don't have an I combat myself a lot. There's a lot of things I think about it, to be perfectly honest with you, that, you know, but I'm not decisively like, no, this is wrong, or no, this is right, or anything like that. But there's a difference between, like, if you're going to be an 8-year-old, if you're going to be an 8-year-old who identifies as a female, you should identify as an 8-year-old female, not a 24-year-old female, not a female who's up on stage performing in full makeup or anything like that. I wouldn't, like I said it several times during the whole conversation, I wouldn't let my daughter do this. This has nothing to do with, you know, this is because of the trans thing or anything like that. This is like, I wouldn't let anybody who identified as a girl or a boy do this, because this seems inappropriate. It seems inappropriate. And look, again, this is another point where we're kind of crossing that impasse where it's like, you see things one way, I see things another way.
Yeah.
The major thing that I had the whole time was like, I resented the fact that my sentiments were met with this. It really is this kind of like, it always seems to fall down to a kind of character assassination. You know, it always seems to come down to this thing where people go, well, you think this because you're this, and I'm going to come up with reasons why your opinion isn't eligible for consideration or things like that. And that is the element of society that I find to be extremely dangerous. I find that to be extremely dangerous when we say that these type of opinions aren't okay because we have decided for ourselves that these things aren't up for consideration. And so when to bring it way back, when it comes to the bullying in school and things like that, when it comes to the whole elements of like, I want to be able to send my kid to school, especially if he is in a public institution. I expect none of those teachings to be based off of any religious standards like that. It doesn't belong in a public institution. But then you have the whole, what if I sent my kid to Loyola? What if I was spending thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars a year to send my kid to a private institution that taught that homosexuality or something like that? And again, I wouldn't send my kid to that school. I wouldn't send my kid to that school, but I would, however, defend the right of those who do want to send their kids to those schools to have the right to teach their kids what they believe. Because the minute you're not allowed to teach your kids what you believe, then you exist in a fascist society. Then you have now limited the discourse. You have now said, these are the opinions that we believe, these are the opinions that we don't believe, and if you don't believe in these, then you're wrong, and you're not allowed to speak. You're not allowed to go to my college. You're not allowed to do these things. That shit is dangerous to me. It's incredibly dangerous to me. And when I talk about hijacking, I think that that's what that is. I think that there's a certain element of people that take these things to like, look, I know everyone in the transgender community isn't super concerned about the freaking, you call me this pronoun, you call me that pronoun, you call me zim, zem, her, or whatever. Like,
How do you know that?
I don't imagine that the majority of the people in the transgender community that their main issue, what they think would solve their livelihood is, you have to call me by this word. I don't think that anybody is delusional enough to think, no, this is what would solve my problems. And so when it's raised to that level, then you reach the opposition, because you've reached such a opposite side of the spectrum that you're just asking for opposition, because there are legitimately people who are saying, no, I'm not for that. Mm-hmm. That's all I have to say on that. But
thoughts?
I mean, that was a lot. As someone who does work with the transgender community, and also someone who is not transgender, I can't speak for transgender folks, but I would imagine that, and I said this before, being called the proper pronoun is not going to solve all of the issues. Certainly not, right? But it is a huge deal to transgender people being referred to as the pronoun with which they identify. They routinely are misgendered by their family members, by their employers. And again, addressing someone with the proper pronoun is an easy way for you to acknowledge them as the human that they are. And I think that so many of the reasons that transgender people suffer discrimination is because people aren't acknowledging them for the humans that they are. So, ergo, I'd say that a law that requires people to use the proper pronouns, which then requires people to see and respect trans people for who they are, that could be a extremely important catalyst to fixing the discrimination that trans people have. And even if it isn't, and if it isn't the big do-all, end-all, then what is the big deal, right? Allowing people to, or not even allowing, but mandating that people refer to transgender people with the correct pronouns shouldn't ruin your day at all. And if the only reason it ruins your day is because now you are required to do it, then I think that you should examine kind of your thoughts and ideas around it in the first place, because there's a bigger conversation around why it's important to respect people that exists outside of, well, I just think it's stupid that I'm required to do this now, and you start requiring this, and maybe you're going to require me to do other things. I think that that's not really getting at really the big picture.
I think it's avoiding the adult element of things. If you were to come to me and say to me, hey, Jim, before we start this podcast, I prefer if you call me this, that, the other thing, I would, because I'm not a dick, I would say, all right, Jabari, I got you, dude. Like, whatever you want me to call you, right, that's what I'll call you. It kind of takes away, like, the whole, again, I'll say the adult aspect of things. Like, take a swig of beer real quick.
I'll do the same.
I hope I still have some. I do.
This all comes down to one major thing, and the major thing is, because I consider myself to be a good person, I would identify you or call you whatever you prefer. Now, to be honest with you, there is a time where if you were like super strict about like, okay, well, no, you got to call me this, that, the other thing, I probably honestly just wouldn't hang out with you. If I were to be perfectly honest with you, if you were like, no, you got to call me Zim, and I don't know, Again, I don't claim to be like super in touch with the transgender community, and I've read, and things like that through research that this isn't necessarily one of the major concerns. Like I feel like a lot of the transgender community, they just prefer like a general neutral term like they or something like that.
No, not
No?
true.
What do they prefer?
Not true. So if you are a man, then you would prefer he. If you are a woman, you'd prefer she. If you have a gender identity that exists in between or outside of that binary, you might use they. And if they doesn't work for you, you might use the ones that you, I think, have tried to pronounce, Z and here, or Z and them, those, which are not very common.
That's what I was saying. I was saying it's not super common.
The Z and the here, the Z, them aren't as common, but transgender people who have their understanding of their gender want to be called exactly what their gender is. So if they are men, they want to be called he. If they're women, they want to be called she. But if they are non-binary, then they would be called they. And that is like 100% what any transgender person would want.
Sure. But do you see the danger in making it a law?
No, not at all. Because, again, there's a difference between making a mistake and doing it on purpose. And let's say that I use the pronoun she, and you've known me since high school, right? So if all of a sudden I use the pronoun she, obviously you might slip up a couple of times and you might say he, oh, I'm so sorry, I mean she, right? And that would be fine, and that wouldn't be necessarily against the law. And I suspect that trans people know the difference between someone who is making a mistake or intentionally doing it. Now, if there's someone like an employer who that you have a trans employee and their pronouns are she, but you consistently refuse to use she because you don't see that person as a woman and you insist to call him or call her he, then that is a problem because that's not creating a safe work environment. That's completely hostile. And I think that it's giving a pass for someone to spew, hate and discrimination against somebody on purpose. And for that law, I would absolutely support that.
I guess I'm just thinking like we're all adults. Like I'm just imagining myself, and again, this might be a mistake on my part. I'm just trying to imagine myself in this position. Yeah. And I feel like I don't know, man. It just doesn't.
And also, you don't have as much to lose, right? Like, it's easy for you to say, if you want to be strict about your pronouns, then I just won't hang out with you, right? And, a lot of that is your own personal frustration around changing your beliefs, your language, in order to make space for somebody else. And that's easy to do as a person who doesn't have to worry about this. When you go to an airport, it says Jimmy, male, he, no problems. And so it's so easy to consider and be intoxicated by all the privilege and power that you have and not be concerned with the fact that these people are making and living daily struggles to where this is a huge deal and people have given up on them and kicked them out and don't hang out with them. 40% of all homeless youth in America are LGBT. 40% of every young person who is homeless in America are LGBT, and a large majority of those are transgender and gender nonconforming young people because their parents, too, say, I'm not dealing with this. I'm not hanging out with you more, quote unquote, get out of my house. And so it's easy to make those decisions, but we have to really analyze why we're making them and at whose detriment. And when you really understand that, you realize that, wow, I could really be a jerk by just saying, transgender person, now you're just depleted out of my life because it was too much for me to call you who you are. And I think that that's, again, not nice.
It's not nice, but I mean, really, you're going to, people can be prosecuted for this?
Yeah, that's horrible.
People can be sent to jail for simply, like I said, if I was somebody who didn't believe in the same thing you believed, I could be sent to jail for that. And you agree with that?
I'd say if that was a law, that was the law of the land.
That is the law of the land in Canada.
Then yeah, I think that absolutely if that's the law, because it's such an easy law to follow.
But that shouldn't be the standard by which laws are followed.
That's not all of them. No, not at all. But I think that it's on the right side of the issue when it comes to civil rights. You know, it's an easy law to follow. Is it easy to just have one water fountain and not two?
It's like the same. It's like the
It's just
same.
a law, though. At the end of the day,
No,
like,
but
you know,
laws
like,
set precedents. Laws set precedents. We have to acknowledge that when you set a law, you are setting a precedent.
Definitely.
For normality of something. So once you normalize making something legal / illegal based off of something that somebody says, then you've set the precedent for making anything that somebody says legal. And I know that sounds ridiculous to a lot of people. A lot of people say, well, you know, a lot of people raise the same argument with marijuana. Well, if he wasn't smoking weed, then he wouldn't have... What's the problem? All you got to do is not smoke weed. Like, it's not that big of a fucking deal, dude. Just don't smoke weed. But and people go like I, as a human being, have the right, I believe, to fucking decide for myself as an adult grown man what I choose to do with my body. Mm-hmm. And if what I choose to do with my body doesn't conform with what you decide I should be allowed to do with my body, then I don't know. It just doesn't seem like a good principle to say that, well, I mean, look, we're just going to make this law, and this law, therefore, because, look, how hard could it be? How hard could it be? Mm-hmm. That can't be. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's got to be some type of understanding that this is how, and I know I sound a little bit crazy when I say this.
Yep.
I know I sound a little bit crazy when I say this, and I'm sorry.
Let's prepare.
I'm just being honest. I'm just being honest with you. I do think it's a little bit crazy once you suggest that, look, we're just going to make it illegal to say this because you would have to be crazy. We're just going to make it illegal. We're just going to make it illegal to say that evolution isn't real. Because you would have to be fucking stupid to not recognize that evolution is a real thing. Like, you would have to be stupid to not look at a fish and then look at an amphibian and then look at reptiles and look at mammals and see how that all progressed. We're just going to make it... This is... Like, you would be stupid to not realize that, and therefore we're going to make it illegal for you to say that Adam and Eve created the world. It is a very dangerous precedent that you're setting there.
Isn't that illegal?
No.
You can't in public school teach creationism.
Because it's based on a belief system and not scientific fact. That's why you can't do it. There's no scientific fact that... There's no scientific evidence that I'm aware of, maybe that you might be aware of, that I'm not aware of, that proves that gender identity is completely disconnected from biological sexual... I mean, there's evidence of the fact that transgenderism is real. It absolutely is real. It's gender dysphoria. It's listed in the DSM-5 as like a legitimate, what they call now to be a mental disorder. Mm-hmm. But to just start teaching, I mean, this is a whole different conversation, but to start teaching in schools that actually gender is completely fluid and has nothing to do with your biological sex, that's not scientifically backed. That's a belief system. There's no scientific evidence that I'm aware of.
Well, the thing is, when we're talking about gender isn't scientific, right? It's completely cultural, it's behavioral. And there is behavioral science that certainly studies how gender manifests itself in the world. And what is scientific fact is that humans possess all different types of biology and chromosomes, and there is no evidence to prove that a young person born with certain chromosomes should identify with a certain gender. So there's no scientific link between sex and biology. So just because I was born with an XY chromosome does not necessarily mean that I'm going to identify with the male gender.
Doesn't mean that, no.
Doesn't mean it at all. But however, it is certainly known and accepted widely. And again, gender not being scientific, we understand gender to be something very cultural, that different cultures make their own ideas of what gender is based on societal norms and practices. The performance of being male in America is different than the performance of being male in Africa, is different than being the performance of male in Europe, in all these different nuanced ways. And so people who study humans and, understand behavioral science certainly understand that gender being cultural is an identity that anyone can possess. And so it doesn't become a scientific belief. It becomes just a fact of life that as a human, you have the capacity to identify with a gender And again, gender being given to you by your culture, by your surroundings, your community, all of those things. That you have the propensity as a human to identify with an identity of a certain gender, and that makes you who you are. So in that line of thinking, understanding that biological sex and gender identity are two different things is completely accepted. Another thing that isn't scientific fact is that they aren't, right? So there isn't any scientific fact that says that someone can't decide their gender identity either. We know gender being an identity, and what an identity is your inner understanding of who you are is just accepted as something that humans can do. And so it is accepted as fact, that gender identity is distinct from biological sex. And yes, if someone is born or the doctor assigns that person a sex, that has little to nothing to do with the gender that this person will actually identify with. And that's a fact of life. And if we're going to conclude that transgender people are real, we then also have to conclude that there is not a conflation between sex and gender identity. You have to conclude those both things.
You can conclude that there's a dissonance between the two.
Yeah.
You can conclude that there could be, you could conclude that to conclude that your biological sex has nothing to do with the gender identity you assume is a little bit dishonest.
How?
You can conclude to say that something has nothing to do with something versus something that has it could, like, they are slightly independent. You're saying that 99.7% of people in the world that are born with a certain biological sex identify with that same gender. So to say that it has nothing to do is dishonest.
Well, I said little to nothing to do.
Little to nothing.
Right.
You're talking about very little to nothing.
Yeah.
You're talking about very little to nothing.
I would
not
just say
saying-
little to nothing. Just regular old little.
So are you saying that, I guess, that all of the gender identity comes from a social thing? It's just all social?
100%. It is your inner understanding of who you are in terms of your gender.
There's no biological backing for why a male...
Nope. There are vast hormonal differences between bodies that we assign male biologically and bodies that we assign female biologically that don't align to any sort of gender expectations at all. The only thing that creates gender expectations is our society.
Well, I mean, I
There's
feel like
no
that's
soci-
there's
there's no
certain
biology
there's
around
certain
it.
roles in human society, and not just society, human biology, that very clearly demonstrate that there are differences between men and women.
How? That extrapolate into our understanding of gender.
A woman literally can conceive a baby, raise that baby, and then feed that baby from her own body, based off of her biology.
Yes.
Biology. So to say that the element of nurturing a child has nothing to do with the feminine biology is I don't see how that makes sense.
So when we talk about feminine biology, again, we're talking about science. So we're talking about a person's sex organs and their ability to produce milk, withhold and grow a child, and nurture it. A trans man can do the same thing.
No, he can't.
How not? A trans man
trans
also
man
has
cannot,
breasts.
A trans man cannot conceive a child.
Yet
a trans man cannot.
Wait a
No.
minute, Jimmy. Do you know
They
what a
haven't
trans man is?
undergone
Do you know what a trans
surgery.
man is? A trans man is someone whose sex assigned at birth
Oh, you're
was
talking about
female.
You're talking about okay. I get you.
and they
I
identify
feel what you're
as
saying.
a man.
I thought you were talking about somebody who. Okay.
No, that would be
I
a
feel-
trans woman.
Okay.
A trans man, because of his biology, can conceive a child, can birth it, can nurture it, can carry it, can breastfeed it, and he's a man.
I don't know. I feel like the hang up is that it's taking it almost needed a new word for what it is, you know what I mean? Because it's so many people see gender and just see it as a binary thing. I feel like you could just leave it at that instead of having to introduce I'm biologically a man, but then my gender is this. You could just say I'm a man, but I'm not good at naming things on the spot.
I mean,
but I'm like this, but my this is that. You know what I mean?
I
don't
think
know.
that really the biology of a person doesn't necessarily matter. The social transaction in which we
Well, I
recognize
think-
people is like with their gender.
I
we
think
see men and women.
I think I saw or I heard about it maybe from you, but it was like a study where people who identified with as a man typically had more percentage of gray matter, and people who identified as women, regardless of if they're born as biologically a man or a woman, they had more white matter in their brain.
Sure.
I think I guess I see what you're saying. That yes, in theory, someone who is someone who's a woman who is trans man can also fulfill the roles of the female role. At the same time, you're kind of saying that it's a coincidence that women are biologically constructed to perform those roles, and you're saying it's a complete coincidence that these women have those abilities, that it's not having anything to do with anything other than a societal construction? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm saying that the ability to have children is purely and merely biological,
Yes.
and it stops there.
But you don't think that there's any brain chemistry or anything else that goes along with the ability? I mean, there's clearly biological chemistry that directs, there's certainly, look, to deny that women and men have different brain chemistries and look, obviously, like Eric was talking about, he was citing a experiment that we were talking about earlier, which was that people who, and again, this is me not conceding, because I've never said it wasn't the case, that people who are trans male or trans whatever, they actually do. There's certain people who are ignorant enough to suggest that it's literally just a dude who thinks he's a guy. Or, a dude who thinks he's a girl, or a girl who thinks he's a chick. It's not that simple. There is a biological background for that. People who are trans female or trans male have a different brain chemistry that they've studied, or at least they've observed it on a significant amount.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that the study that Eric cited was talking about gray matter and white matter. And I don't know if that had any implications on how gender is performed in our society, number one. Number two, there could be some behavioral science implications for that study. So because of the way that men and women interact with the world, we know that the brain changes over time based on your surroundings, that the brain you're born with isn't always the brain you die with. And so there also could be other, again, societal implications for why someone who's a woman would have a different brain than a man.
Why is it that when you look at the rest of the animal kingdom, they all seem to follow suit in this same construction, social construction that you're talking about?
What do you mean?
As in, the males fill a certain role and the women fill a certain role, and it's entirely biological. And nobody would. When you talk about, and yes, granted, males in different animal kingdoms or whatever fulfill a certain different role that might be different from the role that males in the human kingdom fulfill. However, it is observed that it seems to be that no matter what gender you are in a certain animal kingdom or a certain species, they all seem to perform those same. I guess what I'm trying to tackle here is, you're saying that all the gender roles and everything like that is entirely
social.
And
Yes.
And
there's
he's
no.
also saying that they still exist, but it's just not limited to if you're born a male or female.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's limited. I wouldn't say it's limited. Obviously, it's not limited. I'm not saying it's limited, but to say it's completely disconnected again, that's where I have to say, nah, come on. You're gonna say it's disconnected. You're gonna say that the roles that the gender roles that a male and female perform are completely irrelevant of their biological background.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that also, things that I've read, which, we're citing all types of stuff that we can put the bibliography in the comments. But really there are no large significant distinctions in biology and brain chemistry than men and women. Really is not.
Well, there's only like a 0.3% difference between a man and a chimpanzee. That doesn't mean we're not different.
But those 0.3 differences that exist are, within the DNA and the genes, and we're not trying to get too much into science here, but there's certainly difference between a genotype and a phenotype, right? And a phenotype is what we see, and a genotype is what we don't. And the 0.3 difference between a human and a chimpanzee obviously is the phenotype. So whether or not our brains or our bodies are 99.3% similar, that 0.7 is a hell of a lot, right? Because I look like a human and not a chimpanzee. So those differences, in fact, are very significant.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying it's completely disconnected. I'm saying that I'm not saying that it's completely like if you're a man, you're definitely a man. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that like if you were born a biological male, then there's no possible way you could identify as the, what do you call it, phenotype or whatever? Not phenotype. Phenotype is physiology. You couldn't perceive yourself as a female. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that when you look, I mean, from a statistical standpoint, when you look at, okay, 99.7% of people who are born biologically male identify as male. How can you say that's not a connection?
And also, how do you know that that's what the percentage is? There's a large percentage of people who are born transgender that never disclose their gender identity.
Possibly.
So it actually could be a lot less of a percentage than that, but you would never know because our society isn't safe enough for transgender people to exist.
I guess, man. I guess.
That's true.
I guess that's a possibility. I'm looking around. I'm looking around for examples throughout the animal kingdom that demonstrate that humans could be that much different, and I'm just not finding it. I'm not seeing it.
Well, what's different is humans are, sentient social beings that construct things like society and language.
Yeah, but that comes from a biological standpoint. Like before we were social and sentient, we were creatures.
Sure, but what made us social?
I don't know. Apparently the
Interaction.
ability to make up shit. I don't know.
Necessity, interaction, language, the need to communicate. And those things aren't scientific.
But does that discount what was there before?
No, that's just where folks came from. Do I think they were transgender cavemen? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, of course there were. There's probably transgender chimpanzees, transgender dolphins, all kinds of
Definitely,
shit.
for sure.
Doesn't mean, I don't know. It just seems, I guess, look, again, I'm coming at it from a standpoint, it's like, dude, I guess it's just very hard of a thing to digest that I guess you're trying to say it has nothing to do with anything.
And also, let's go with your thing. Let's say that it's true that 99% of people who are born biologically male identify as men.
Well, that's the statistic I looked up.
Let's just say it's true.
We could say that it's not a thing because there might be people that lied, but I'm just going with what evidence is there for me.
Well, let's just say that's true.
You're going with what evidence is there for you to say.
But I think that most people probably would say that, there are probably about 99% of cisgender people around. And cisgender is
probably
someone who's
sounds
not
about
transgender. Right. But even if you conclude that, there's nothing else that I can latch onto that argument. So, just because 99% of people are cisgender, that doesn't really have anything to do with the 1% of people who aren't.
Of course not.
Right.
But that doesn't make the 0.3% of people as if to say that discounts the norm.
What do you mean by discounts the norm?
I mean to say if we can find 0.1% of people or 0.3% of people that don't conform with the thing that we've said, that doesn't discount the norm. Like if we could find 0.3% of people that are born with 6 fingers, it doesn't mean that the human being is born with 5 fingers. For instance, 1 in 68 babies born in America is born autistic. That's 3 times the amount of well, again, this is another thing. That's 3 times the amount of people in America that identify as transgender. But we still say that, being autistic is that's not the norm. That's not the typical thing. That's not the typical thing to be.
I don't think anyone is saying that being transgender is the typical thing. It's not.
Sure.
It's just not. It simply isn't. But we just believe that the people who are should be respected just as much as the people who aren't.
I believe that too.
Right.
I believe that too.
Yeah.
I believe that too. I'm not saying that I don't believe that.
Right.
I'm just saying there comes a difference between saying that they should be respected for who they are versus no, all your ideologies about what gender is completely wrong because there's 0.3% of our society who don't conform to it.
Well, I don't think that we're saying that it's completely wrong. We're just saying that...
Well, that's kind of what you're saying. You're kind of saying that You're kind of saying that no, there's no biological backing to suggest that human beings, their biological sex has anything to do with their gender identification. When you say that, that's the consensus of current science is that
The consensus of current science is that there is a connection between biological sex and gender. That's what you're saying?
yes.
I don't know what science that is. I think that I really don't know what science that is. I think that anyone who is a competent medical professional would able to make the distinction between somebody's biology and their gender identity.
Sure.
And they should be able to understand gender identity as what it is, as an identity. And a high percentage that are people who are born with male chromosomes identify as male, sure. And a high percentage of people who are born with female chromosomes identify as female, sure. But that isn't to say that it is not true that gender identity is just an identity and biology is something completely different from that. They just are not the same.
They're not the same. I will hand you that.
And I will say that, when you mentioned gender dysphoria and these things, these are ways for systems and peoples to apply pathology to being a transgender person. Like, there has to be something wrong with you. I'm not saying this is what you're saying. I'm saying that, homosexuality was in the DSM until 1979, something like that. And so finally we realized that in fact wasn't true, because it was commonly held science that somebody who identified as homosexual had a mental disorder. And I think today we're now understanding similar things about gender identity and biology, and that maybe forever we thought they were linked, but in fact they just aren't.
I think there is. I mean, what's the definition of a mental disorder?
The definition of a mental disorder, I don't know, a condition that somebody has that possibly inhibits their normal development as a person. Maybe.
Would that not constitute gender dysphoria?
No, not at all. I think that there are plenty of transgender people who live normal, healthy, fulfilling lives. And the fact that somebody is transgender doesn't mean that they have a disorder.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of people who are autistic or have ADHD or have Down syndrome or anything else that live perfectly healthy, fulfilling lives.
Undiagnosed.
It doesn't.
I think
even diagnose.
I think the purpose of the DSM is just so that whatever, anything, no matter the person, they never want to think that they're abnormal. You know what I mean? Like, I would never want to go get tested for any fucking ADHD thing or anything, just because I'm good how I am. I don't want to get on any pills or anything to slow me down, or I don't want to have to be Jimmy was talking about it last week, but having to have a cup of coffee every morning to get out of bed. You know what I mean? I never want to have to be like that. So I'm fine how I am right now. I've been doing good. I've been getting by. But I'm sure I'm fucked up in some sort of way. I just don't acknowledge it. But it's just easier to acknowledge it for someone. It sounds terrible coming out, but
no.
You can understand.
There's a positive side to gender dysphoria in the DSM. And let me tell you what the positive side is. It's unfortunate, but the positive side is that transgender folks are able to be prescribed hormone therapy and undergo surgical procedures if they wish, because
with
we know
health insurance. Right?
Not everybody wants to do that. But in order for that to happen, there has to be a diagnosable condition, right? And so the fact that gender dysphoria is in the DSM gives access for transgender folks to navigate large medical systems in order to get the treatment that they need to feel full, complete people in the way that they want. So
then it's kind of treated the same way as depression then, which is in the DSM as too. You get the treatment, so then you don't have to have anything. Once you have the treatment, you're not conflicted with that state of illness anymore, because you are your complete being.
But the thing is, I mean, I agree with that, but there is, I think, a little bit difference, and I think you would also agree that there's a difference between depression and being transgender, right?
Oh, for sure.
Because someone who is given depression is then that's a lifelong diagnosis. And even though you are able to manage it and treat it in such a way where it doesn't affect your life, remnants of having depression will always be there.
Wouldn't that be the same case for transsexuals too, or
Transgender folks.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. Well, for transgender people, I think that, if we think about what depression does to the brain and the body, right? And those things are completely and scientifically shown to be degenerative to people's brain and their physical health. That's not the same for gender dysphoria. The only thing that you need to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria is that you believe that you are not in the body in which you should be. And so transgender people don't really suffer the same degenerative effects of something like depression, because it's not the same type of disorder that literally cripples, your body, your health, and your brain. And so I think it's a bit silly for it to be seen as a disorder. But at the same time, unfortunately today, it's necessary.
I think it's kind of a little bit demeaning to those who have mental disorders to have people so vehemently oppose that as being a mental disorder. Like the idea that you could suffer from depression, you could suffer from OCD, you could suffer from autism, you could suffer from ADHD. These are all things that are acknowledged to be mental disorders of some sort.
Yeah.
And to imply that, well, how could you possibly imply that I have a mental disorder because I don't know.
I see what you're trying to say.
It's almost like we're not saying it's a bad thing. We're not saying it's a bad thing to suffer from. I will say suffer, but it doesn't have to be a suffering thing. I don't consider myself to suffer from ADHD. In fact, I think it's probably the whole reason why we have this fucking podcast in the first place. But at the end of the day, it's like I acknowledge that it doesn't. I don't know. It just doesn't. It doesn't like. It just seems. It just seems very not. It just. I don't know. I would love to see if you could send me something after the podcast, or message me or comment or something like that could convince me that there's nothing related between gender and biological sex. Then I would say, okay, fine. I don't know, but I don't know if there's anything that supports that. And there's nothing wrong if that's not the case. That's my whole point. Isn't that well, if you can't prove that there's nothing connected, then that means that everybody who's saying this shit is faking it. No. I'm just saying, it's like saying everybody who's gay is faking it. Everybody who's fucking autistic is fake. No. Yeah. There's legitimate cause behind this, but it just seems dishonest to me to kind of purport this narrative that they're completely disconnected, because that changes the whole foundation of the society that we've built. And I know what your thinking is. I know what your thinking is, that, well, the society that we built is corrupt and biased towards this, that, the other thing. And my whole question is, somebody at some, when it comes to the patriarchy, of men and women, there's nobody along the course of history that just decided, and it was a big mass coincidence across the entire human race that women fulfilled, and that women had this, that women fulfilled these type of roles and men fulfilled these type of roles. It's not. There is a biological background for that. There most certainly is. There most certainly is a biological background for that. And to say that there isn't just seems kind of like it doesn't.
Yeah, I'd say that there wasn't. I'd say that the reason that we think about gender roles and gender expectations is purely social, and purely because of how societies were built and constructed, and because men, in their broad shoulders and deep voices and taller statures, for some reason got the idea that they should somehow rule society.
But you don't think there was a coincidence that, hey, women, you have, you're able to conceive children and you're able to raise children off of eating and then feeding them through your breasts, which I can't fucking do. You don't think there was a coincidence between them assuming those roles, between men assuming other roles? You think there was no biological background?
No, I think that there's nothing to do with that. I know that there are some people who have breasts that identify as men or just as kick-ass. And there are people who identify as, women who don't want to, subscribe to the gender roles that we've prescribed for men at all. And I think that the gender roles and gender,
And therefore, because of those people, it's all wrong.
definitely, because it started off back then, right? And here we are today. And not only that, it continues to be reinforced, right? There's no work to undo it. And so today, women consistently make 75% of what a man does. Women consistently are harassed and are misportrayed in the media. And women consistently do emotional labor for immature men that think that they know everything and consistently
That's
are
true.
the victims of abuse. Yeah. And so these things consistently are. If there was any work to be done to reverse that, that'd be one thing, but there isn't. There are things that literally hold up these systems.
I think there's
today.
a certain beauty about that, man. To be honest,
About
I think
what?
About the roles that we play. I really do. I think there is a certain beauty to be admired about the different roles that we play, and I think, and we talked about this before on the podcast, and I think the major misstep in the culture that was built around this whole movement was that we've kind of discounted the importance of those roles being played in society. We've kind of told women that if you're not doing these things, if you're not fulfilling what a man could do, you're not living up to your full potential. As if to say that a woman's role isn't enough or something like that. If that makes any sense.
Or, concluding that a woman can't do everything that a man can do.
Absolutely, of course you
women
can.
weren't given opportunities to perform.
And more.
And more.
Yeah.
Typically more.
Yeah.
But women weren't given the same opportunities to perform the things that men claim to be so good at,
Yeah.
Jobs, voting, war, all of those things. We literally placed women in a place of nurturance and domestic work because we didn't believe or want to give up the power that they actually
But why
could.
wasn't it the other way around? Just coincidence?
I think so. And again, I think because of those biological things, like men thinking that they are taller and stronger.
We are
and all
taller and
those
stronger.
things. I don't know. I met some big women, bigger than you, Jimmy.
I'll kick any woman's ass. I'm just fucking around. I'm just fucking around. Come on, man. You gotta
Masculinity.
admit something. You gotta give me something. I
No.
mean, it's not just us thinking we're bigger and stronger. Like, there's no women in the NFL. There's no there's a
Why is there no women in the NFL? Is it
because they
that
can't compete.
See?
Ah,
There you
come
go.
on,
There
man.
you go.
Come on, give me a
I
fucking
bet
break.
if we let women in the NFL, they'd show all you men.
No, they
Yeah.
wouldn't.
Oh, they
no, they
absolutely
wouldn't.
Are there
would.
No,
any
they
women
wouldn't.
that look like Ray Rice though? Are there really?
No.
I'm sure they're out there.
Okay.
I'm sure they're
no.
out there.
And if they are, they're doing male hormones.
Nope.
Yes,
I don't believe that
absolutely.
at all.
Come on, Jabari.
Nope. I think again that's like men,
Killing
and,
me
men
right
and
now,
their
dude.
old men shit. That's really all that is. That's why women aren't allowed in the NFL because they'd probably
When you
run
see
you
a
men up and down the
kid-
court.
When you see like a 10-year-old with a black belt, are you intimidated by him?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They have a black belt. Are you serious?
If they found a
Hold
woman,
an
if
arm
they
out
found a woman who could
on
run
their forehead.
if
I'm
they
never
found
gonna
a woman
discount
who
or
could
discredit
run
anyone.
a 4-1-40, bench press 345 pounds, that bitch would be in the NFL.
That's not true.
Yes, she would.
Because
they would make money off of her, and that's the end of the day. It's
Oh,
capitalism.
money. Oof.
That's you're saying it all comes down to that.
Oh
I'm
my
saying I
gosh.
agree. I'm saying yes, absolutely. They would make money off of that shit, and therefore nobody's going to say. First of all, if you're an NFL team, having the first woman in the NFL is a major marketing advancement.
Yeah.
Do you know how much money the first team? There's a woman who's coming up right now who is a kicker. I forgot what college she's from, but she's
seen her.
she's fitting to be the first female NFL player ever because she's a kicker.
Yep.
Least physical job in the NFL. Just saying.
Oh my God.
Just saying.
Misogyny.
Might be a coincidence. Probably a coincidence. I'm gonna say it's a coincidence.
I'm gonna say
Definitely a
it's
coincidence.
misogyny, but okay.
Definitely a coincidence.
But
Definitely a
also at the
coincidence.
same time, how much of America would be okay with just watching someone's daughter get fucking tackled by two people at the same time?
They would be fine with it because, again, the reason why we think that image is so heart-wrenching is because of societal ideas. That's it.
Dog.
If we looked at people's daughters the same way we looked at people's sons, it would not matter.
Dog, there are absolutely differences.
I think it sounds good for you because you benefit from those differences.
I don't benefit from shit, dude. I'm a fucking guy. I definitely benefit from shit. But I'm saying, like, me saying that, yeah, men are stronger, women are better at this, men are better at this, that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. And to say that it's not true, that, oh, actually, it's just not It's not real. What you're saying isn't real.
All right. Well, again, you have your beliefs and I have mine, and that's where we will agree. But I believe that is not true, and women have every ability, opportunity, biology, everything to do every single thing a man can do and more and better. And men just should get over themselves.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Masculinity is so
I think
fragile.
that wraps it up. You wanna? I don't want to keep you here too long. It's getting late.
It is. How long has this been? This is a
We've
great.
been going for a while.
Yeah.
But I want to let you plug anything you want to plug. Obviously.
Sure. I mean, so
All
I'm
the
the director.
More like
of,
fug anything you want to fug,
yeah,
bro.
for sure. Definitely that. So yeah, I'm the director of GLSEN Baltimore. That's GLSEN Baltimore. If you are connected to a school or connected to a young person who needs help and resources around making your environment safer for LGBT folks, hit us up. www.glistenbaltimore.org. You can find us on our Facebook page. Again, I also mentioned that I'm involved with the GLCCB, Baltimore's LGBT Community Center. That's glccb.org. So get involved with us, Baltimore Pride, or any LGBT issues really in general. You can get in touch with me. But I thank you guys for this opportunity.
Dude, this was awesome.
A
Thanks
really
so much
great,
for coming through.
Absolutely. Miller High Lives, Newports, and great conversation. I could do that every Thursday.
Hell yeah. Yeah, man.
Thank you guys.
Anytime, dude.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Whenever you want.
Absolutely. Anytime. Eric, what do you got to? What's the Baltimore Comedy Festival doing this week?
Open submissions till July 15th. We're getting, people coming in from all over the place, it seems. And we're still talking to some big guns to come down and do some headline spots for some of the big shows. We just added Exit the Art Space. We added, I think we have like 13 venues now for the whole festival.
Wow.
So, keep an eye out for that. We're going to have a booth at Artscape. Come by, say hi. And check out The Darkest. Check out me on everything at Eric Glazer. At LFTS Podcast on everything. Jimmy, what you got?
Guys, that's Jimmy Selesky, Twitter. And be sure to check out Laughable. Shout out to my man, Ned McKinney, the man with the plan. He's the boy. Laughable is coming out on...
Ned, where's the Android app?
Yeah. We've
been saying it's coming.
We've been saying it's coming,
in
Ned.
the summer.
You're making me look stupid right now. You're making me look
But
real
check out Laughable
stupid.
on iTunes. It's a great app. You can check out all your favorite podcasts, and it'll index everyone on each episode so you can see, whatever other podcasts are
You can
on.
search by comic. What a revelation. What a revelation.
Follow me and Jimmy on Laughable and see the one other podcast I'm on.
Yes. Guys, at LFTS Podcast on everything. SoundCloud, Google Play, Twitter, Facebook, all the other things you can think of. Instagram, that's a good one. We're on it.
Hell
Guys,
yeah. Stitcher.
till next week. And remember that I don't plan my playouts efficiently. Remember that. All right, Jack. There you go.
There's Jack.
Hey, it's always better when we're together.
There's no combination of words I could put on the back of a postcard. No song that I could sing, but I can try for your heart. Our dreams, and they are made out of real things, like a shoebox of photographs with sepia tone loving. Love is the answer, at least, for most of the questions in my